Chapter 407. Silin, Ci Jincheng, and Feng Haichao went back the way they came. Before the operation, they had planned a few escape routes. If they were discovered or for some other reason, they would have an escape route so they would not panic. However, it had been more than 10 minutes since Glier returned to his office. There was no reaction from him. He did not sound the alarm or send more people to check. It seemed like Glier did not notice anything out of the ordinary. Or maybe he did not notice anything in time. Or was there some other reason? It was not that Silin was being paranoid. He had a weird feeling in his heart. There was no sense of success in completing the mission. There was nothing to be happy about. This was strange. No matter what, there was no alarm in this research base. Ci Jincheng seized the time to inform the others to retreat. He was afraid that the alarm would go off in the next moment. That would be troublesome. The device that Knight and the rest had on them would automatically copy all the information that they could steal from the area they were in. As long as they were not discovered, all Knight and the rest had to do was to walk around. They did not have to crack the password of those databases on purpose. They would not bother with some of the highly confidential ones. The main mission this time was to see if the nightmare taper experiment was going on and find out some related information. The rest was just a side mission. Once Silin, Ci Jincheng, and the others were discovered, the others would create chaos everywhere to attract attention and share the pressure on Silin's side. From the looks of it, things were going well. After Knight received Ci Jincheng's order to retreat, he led the other two people in his team and retreated according to the planned route. He saw a lot of research progress related to the 6th Army during this trip. It did not seem like there was anything particularly outstanding or advanced. Knight was very disappointed. However, the news from Silin diluted his disappointment. Any information about the nightmare taper was exciting. They could only count what they got now. There was just too little information about this thing. It was obvious that Feng was really ruthless back then. After meeting at the planned location, the few of them left the way they came. They waited for the cargo ships or carriers to come and go, found a suitable place to sneak in and left. Somewhere outside the border of the 6th Division's territory, Kong Man was piloting a spaceship and waiting with a few others. After the 6th Division's cargo spaceship left, Kong Man's spaceship was revealed. Not far away in space, a cat was dragging a few people over. That cat. The person beside Kong Man wanted to say something but stopped. His expression was very conflicted. He didn't expect cats to be so useful. Kong Man shook his head and pressed the button to open the hatch to let the people outside in. How is it? Before Silin and the others could steady themselves, Kong Man and the others ran over and asked. Ci Jincheng made a smooth sailing gesture and Kong Man's face lit up with joy as well. He ran back into the cockpit and began to return at full speed. He could not wait to find out more information about those things. Although this trip did not seem spectacular, the information that they found was enough to excite them. With this information, the research on the nightmare taper would speed up. Perhaps they could resolve the disaster that they predicted soon. Knight and the others had already started resting. Their nerves had been stretched taut during the operation, and even when they were being dragged by the gray cat, they were still on high alert for anything that might suddenly appear around them. Now that they were finally back, they had to recover their strength as soon as possible. Ci Jincheng did not rest. He looked at the information in his hand. Since they were on the operation earlier, he did not have much time to look at the information, especially the core information about the nightmare taper that Silin had gotten his hands on. It made Ci Jincheng very excited, so he quickly flipped through the research information. Ghost Claw had already found a place to hide and sleep. It was not far from Ci Jincheng. If that cat came to bully it again, it could get Ci Jincheng's help as soon as possible to avoid getting its fur plucked again. Actually, Hui Mao did not have the mood to care about Ghost Claw. To it, Ghost Claw was not qualified enough. If it wanted to fight, it should look for that stinky rat. If it wanted to play with a pet, it should be a big guy like Blue Skin that could stand up. If it wanted to play games, of course it should look for Cheto, Sigma, and Moon. Therefore, no matter what Hui Mao thought, Ghost Claw was not in its consideration. When there was nothing to play with and nothing to eat, Hui Mao could only sleep. Hui Mao, who was curled up on Silin's lap, did not sleep well either. It could feel Silen's mood. Such an aura was not suitable for sleeping. What's wrong? Hui Mao scratched Silen's pants with its paw. Silen, who was deep in thought, looked down at the curious Hui Mao and scratched its chin. It's nothing. I'm just thinking about something. There are some things that I haven't figured out yet. You humans just like to think blindly. It's easy to turn you into an idiot if you think too much, Hui Mao said seriously. Silen smiled and did not answer. It was not easy to be thoughtless. Silen had a strange feeling. It was a very strange feeling. In short, it was not a good feeling. Although Silen had learned that Glair's research base hadn't shown any unusual reactions up until now, he still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The moment he closed his eyes, he would think of Glair's office. Then, his brain would replay the process of his previous actions one by one. Until now, every detail of this operation would be replayed in Silen's mind. What's wrong? Where? Silen closed his eyes and the scenes replayed in his mind. Glair's chair appeared in his mind for a long time. Then, he went down the tunnel and arrived at the underground laboratory. He went invisible, passed by the busy laboratory, went to the tunnel, and arrived at the guard insects. Silen could clearly feel the antennae on the noses of the guard insects. Guard insects, Silen suddenly opened his eyes. There was something wrong with those guard insects. Every person who passed through the tunnel, whether they were familiar or unfamiliar, would cause the guard insects to react. It was just that familiar people would not cause the guard insects to give off a warning. And the guard insects that Silen saw were too comfortable. They were comfortable as if they had not been stimulated by a smell for a long time. Wasn't that the core laboratory? Shouldn't Glair go there every day to take a look? Even if it was Glair, a familiar smell should have stimulated the guard insects to react. However, the situation of the guard insects was not like this at all. It was as if they had not been stimulated by a foreign smell for at least 5 days. Silen was thinking too deeply that he did not notice that the finger that was scratching Hui Mao's chin was tugging at Hui Mao's beard. Hui Mao looked at Silen, who was deep in thought, and flicked his ear. Never mind, I'll let him tug at my chin for a while. I'll extort a bunch of compensation money when I come back to my senses. When Silen and the others left the 6th Army's area and returned to C.I. Jincheng's place, Glair sent a message from Glair's office in the 3rd experimental area of the base. This place has finally been discovered. After turning off the communicator, Glair looked at his chair with a strange smile on his face. Right now, the chair had already been disassembled. There were some scratches at the bottom of the chair. Every time the chair descended, an almost undetectable scratch would appear at the bottom of the chair. Glair's daily habit was to count these scratches. It was hard to imagine that in a place filled with all kinds of advanced equipment, where even the dead skin that naturally fell off from a human body could be detected, Glair would actually use such a primitive and simple physical method to check if anyone had entered the underground laboratory. But it had to be said that sometimes, the most primitive method was the most overlooked. In reality, the place that Glair paid the most attention to in the entire research base was not the underground experimental area or the core laboratory, but the journey that the chair took from the surface to the underground. During this process, the extra undetectable scratch at the bottom of the chair was what Glair waited for every day. Every time Glair went out and returned, Glair would habitually count these scratch marks. It's finally here, hee. Glair lay on the table and laughed so hard that his entire body was shaking. He looked like an abnormal patient. After Silen and the others returned to C.I. Jincheng's place, Silen borrowed C.I. Jincheng's equipment and contacted Nada. Nada was one of the Fog's assassination targets some time ago, but he was lucky enough to only be injured. He had mostly recovered by now. Silen had visited Nada after the two-team battle, and he was not in mortal danger. Although Nada's strength was not at the top of the Vanguard's upper echelon, his vigilance and self-protection ability were definitely at the top. Otherwise, in that assassination attempt, the 2 upper echelon members who were stronger than Nada had unfortunately died, while Nada only suffered a minor injury. In Nada's own words, Sector S's prison wasn't for nothing. Silen and Nada would contact each other occasionally. Silen didn't know a lot of Vanguard's higher-ups, and Songba Leruo, Bart and Nada were the ones he was more familiar with. The trio had helped Sillin a lot, so Sillin would contact them when he was free. It was just that most of the time, no one had much free time. "Yo, why did you think of contacting me?" On the screen, Nada looked pretty spirited. "I'm here to see how you're recovering and to verify some things," Sillin said. "Oh." Nada raised his slightly white eyebrows. "Tell me. I won't hide anything if I can answer you." "It's about Senior Communidin." Sillin looked at Nada. "I want to confirm if you've given me all of Senior Communidin's records regarding the parasite just like you said before." Nada wasn't surprised by Sillin's question. Right now, the League of Stars was feeling a little uneasy, and they had heard some rumors about it. As a higher-up of Vanguard, Ji Feng would tell them some top-secret information. After a moment of silence, Nada stared at Sillin once more before sighing. "I promised him that I wouldn't take it out easily. Even if the commander asked me to, I wouldn't take it out just like that. Communidin once said that that thing would become a great killing weapon in the hands of some people." Nada was observing Sillin's facial expression while saying this, trying to guess Sillin's current thoughts. However, to Nada's surprise, Sillin was very calm. He was so calm that it was as if he had already guessed what he was going to say next. "What do you know?" Nada asked. Sillin shook his head. "I know a little about what you guys know. When the time comes, once the disaster breaks out, it doesn't matter if the team is prepared to stay away from populated areas or give up the original base. No matter what, I'm prepared to stay. Therefore, I need some of Senior Communidin's records." "That's good too. If you can find a solution, we won't have to look for more difficult areas to avoid," Nada said. Although Nada said this, in fact, Ji Feng had already chosen the difficult areas to avoid. They were all remote planets, and there were even some planets with C-grade habitability. Even if the living environment was harsh, it was better than suffering in the central area. It wasn't just Vanguard. The other hunter regiments had probably already chosen their escape routes. And the purge of the hunter world that they were preparing to carry out gradually calmed down. No one knew what the various parties had received. It was only calm on the surface. Not long ago, when Ji Feng held a meeting with the higher-ups, they had already begun to make their move. They were going to snatch a batch of resources before the disaster broke out. Vanguard and Lon Hudi would make their move against Heaven's Birth soon. None of this was known to outsiders. What outsiders knew was that the hunter regiments had received the news and were preparing to escape. Nada left for a while, and when he reappeared, he was holding a notebook in his hand. This is another notebook outside of the parasitic code. Originally, Communidin wanted to record all of these in the parasitic code, but in the end, he chose to record them separately. As Nada spoke, he flipped open the notebook and showed Sillin one page at a time. In fact, the notebook wasn't thick, and it didn't take long for him to flip through the pages. "What do you think?" Nada smiled and looked at Sillin, wanting to see some annoyance on Sillin's face. However, when he found that Sillin still had the same calm expression that made people want to slap him a few more times, Nada's words of ridicule stopped abruptly. There were two reasons why Nadakin took out the notebook that Kamanadine had specifically instructed him to. One, he hoped that Sillin could find a way to help the Vanguard avoid this disaster. If Sillin succeeded, then it would absolutely be a great thing for the Vanguard, and one could well imagine how much influence they would have in the hunter world. As for the second reason, it was because of the record book itself. Nada had read this notebook many times, but he still couldn't find anything. He couldn't understand it. Yes, he couldn't understand it. Nada also knew a little about parasites because of Communidin. He could understand some of Communidin's previous notebook, but he couldn't understand anything in this notebook. Because it was all code. Communidin said that this was his record of the life code. Whoever could understand his parasitic code should also be able to understand it. Therefore, Nada often thought, did I not understand parasitic code? It was estimated that in the entire Vanguard, besides Sillin, Nada himself was the most familiar with parasitic code. Who would have thought that Nada couldn't understand the other notebook left by Communidin? That's it? Sillin asked. That's it. There are also some specimens. You know, although you didn't take them all, you have seen them all. Now, I'll tell you everything. Nada closed the notebook in his hand. He would not give this notebook away. He could let others see it, but he couldn't let it leak out, at least not now. If it was lost or used by some people in the wrong way, he would be too sorry for Communidin. He didn't give it to Ji-Feng even when he asked for it. He just glanced at Ji-Feng. The result of Ji-Feng's glance was that his face was full of regret and twisted. It was the same expression Nada had when he first saw this notebook. No matter how important it was useless if he couldn't understand it. Then that's it. Rest well and let's cut the nonsense. We'll talk next time. Sillin didn't wait for Nada to flip out and ended the communication. Nada's face twitched at the communicator that had lost its signal. Was he going to throw it away after using it? He really wanted to grab that bastard Sillin and kick him hard. Also, Nada's heart felt like it was being scratched by a cat. Looking at Sillin's expression, he should have understood it, right? Right? He should have. But why didn't he say anything? Nada hesitated while he was in a dilemma. In the end, he didn't tell Ji-Feng. He didn't want to rejoice for nothing. On the other side, Sillin entered C.I. Jincheng's laboratory area after he had imprinted the information recorded in the notebook that Nada had kept in secret into his mind. Over there, C.I. Jincheng had arranged a laboratory for Sillin. Hui Mao crouched on the table next to him and watched as Sillin inputted a long string of unknown characters into the notebook. Then, he cut out some of the characters, pieced them together, and converted them. This process was repeated many times. Hui Mao was about to fall asleep watching, but Sillin's hands showed no signs of slowing down. After a yawn, Hui Mao went to a counter next to the door of this laboratory and lay down. He closed his eyes to rest. With it here, no one could come in and disturb him at this time. Sillin's hands moved quickly. Although he was repeating similar tasks, the sequence he put together every time was different. There were already more than 100 sequences on an instrument next to him. They were all put together by Sillin, and the number was still increasing. When Sillin saw the characters on the notebook, he didn't understand them at first. But when he recalled some of Communidin's annotations and key points in the parasite code he had read before, he could see some hints from the characters. They were just hints, Sillin had to confirm the rest. After putting together a few sequences, Sillin confirmed his thoughts. Every sequence he decoded was a certain gene sequence from a certain parasite. Decoding was only the first step. After the assembly was complete, Sillin needed to filter and intercept the sequences once more. This was a huge calculation and analysis process, and it wasn't something a computer could do alone. It was because he had to incorporate some things from the parasitic code. According to Sillin's prediction, the final result would be the nightmare taper's initial form after decoding all of them. It was the genetic information before it was modified at all. Chapter 408. Recently, all kinds of rumors in the League of Stars had made people anxious. Although some important people had come out to calm down, some things were still stirring in the dark. Other than the Big Four, the other hunters had already started migrating. They liked to roam the galaxy in the first place, and this unknown news made them nervous. It was always good to be prepared. Some of the scattered adventurer organizations began to make preparations. Some of them took this opportunity to make money and strengthen their own teams. At the same time, they were afraid that they would release some false information. Things that were originally non-existent became even more mysterious. The local governments of the various sectors tried their best to control this suppressed commotion, but to no avail. On the military side, someone leaked information about the activities of the 8 great armies, saying that they were searching for something terrifying. This made the already suspicious citizens even more anxious. Looking at the situation, it didn't look like it was fake. Also, military enthusiasts knew a little about the current 8 great armies. The videos that were publicized on the internet allowed them to find too much evidence. Although this video had not existed for a long time, under the verification of some professionals, the local government's criticism of the videos seemed to have exposed something. Inside C.I. Jincheng's base, C.I. Jincheng hadn't slept for a few days. He sent a copy of the newly collected information to the C.I. family. There would be a project team there to analyze and follow up. At the same time, C.I. Jincheng was also researching in his own way. In the past few days, Knight and the others were speechless when they saw C.I. Jincheng. This man with bloodshot eyes, messy hair, stubble, and a strong sense of decadence was C.I. Jincheng? In the past, this guy paid a lot of attention to his appearance. It was obvious how much pressure C.I. Jincheng was under right now. Knight and the others understood. Because of their identities, they knew a lot of things that were hard for others to find out. The recent movements of the armies did indicate that the cleanup of Miracle was not going smoothly. The rumors that were circulating in the League of Stars weren't completely fake. Someone was leaking information. Could be Miracle, or it could be other forces. No matter what, whether the rumors were true or false, they all foretold one thing: a disaster was about to happen. Recently, Knight and the others had been spending all their time in the training room, training to adapt to various conditions. No one knew what the conditions would be like in the place they were going to next. If they did not prepare, they would not have the time to adapt when the time came, and they would be the ones suffering. Just like C.I. Jincheng, Silin was holed up in his own lab. He was almost done deciphering the records that Komunidin left behind. As he continued to decipher them, he was getting closer and closer to the nightmare taper's initial form. The relationship between the primary form of the parasite in the beginning and the modified nightmare taper was crucial. Perhaps he could understand this powerful parasite better if he could learn more about it from its primary form. Even Miracle's people might not have complete information about the nightmare taper's original form. That information had been wiped out during the taper extermination operation almost 20 years ago. Even if it was not completely wiped out, there would not be much left. However, no one would have thought that a long time ago, an unknown hunter would record such a thing and this creature. However, he passed away before he could officially name this creature. It was only when the nightmare taper was discovered and modified by Miracle's people that this parasite spread in a small circle. Cheto had successfully obtained the sample from Achenthus. Silin did not analyze the sample immediately. Instead, he asked Cheto to help C.I. Jincheng. At first, C.I. Jincheng was reluctant. He preferred to explore alone when he was doing research. On the other hand, he thought that an assistant would be a hindrance. It would be fine if it was Silin. C.I. Jincheng acknowledged Silin's abilities, but C.I. Jincheng was too unfamiliar with Cheto. To be honest, C.I. Jincheng did not really trust robots. However, after C.I. Jincheng witnessed Cheto's abilities for himself, he slowly acknowledged him. Cheto was able to analyze problems that even professionals found hard to analyze. C.I. Jincheng thought about it and agreed. How could a person trained by Silin possibly be bad? The days passed by in such a tense atmosphere. Silin did not have the energy to deal with the messages and communication requests inside the communicator, so he asked Hui Mao to handle them for him. Ji Feng, Nata, Yudi and Hidden Wuxia all received the same reply from the cat. Silin is busy. If it's not a life-threatening emergency, wait until he's done. On this day, the base welcomed another member. It was still the same face that made women overflow with motherly instincts. It was still the same person who liked to look at people with his chin, the unconcealable arrogance, and the same awkward personality. The newcomer was the other person who was once called the Twin Stars of Seven Lights along with Kong Man in Seven Lights, Pride. Oh, Pride. Why are you here now? I thought you'd contact us when it's true. Knight said while rubbing his neck and swinging his arms. He had just been tortured by Prisa, and his face was still wounded. However, wounds like this would recover very quickly, and it was nothing to Knight who was already used to it. Pride, however, was different. He curled his lips and looked disdainful when he saw Knight's terrible condition. If I don't come now, I don't think I'll have a chance at all in a few days. Pride answered impatiently. The 4th Legion has been quite active lately. Knight frowned. From what he knew, the 4th Legion's inactivity was one thing, but once it was active, it meant that things were really troublesome. While walking, Pride said indifferently, "It's still the same. Isn't your 3rd Legion and C.I. Jincheng's 7th Legion about the same? Everyone knows what's going on right now. A disaster is probably unavoidable, so we can only scare the people first. When I came here, I heard that the 2nd Legion had captured another batch of Miracle higher-ups. However, these higher-ups committed suicide in a very strange way, just like the ones who were captured before. All they said before they died was a nightmare is coming. The second legion was where the Yu family was located, and these higher-ups who were captured actually used to have dealings with the 8 great legions. Now, they seem to have hardened their hearts and gone crazy. Pride's elder brother Ji Money and second brother Ji Feihong both said that these people were captured on purpose. If they really wanted to escape, they could have run far away, but these people chose to be captured and injected themselves with drugs before they were captured. Once the time was up, they would die. Their bodies would turn gray, stiff, and then shatter into a pile of ashes. Pride's grandfather said that these people seemed to be protecting someone, and the person who had been hiding behind the scenes and evading the 8 Great Legions joint investigation might very well be the person who controlled the awakened Dream Taper's main body. As long as the main body was under control, the other Dream Tapers would listen to his orders and continuously spread the virus. Unless the main body stopped them, the Dream Tapers that carried all kinds of fatal viruses would spread the virus endlessly. Let's not talk about those depressing things. Pride waved his hand. He was especially disgusted by these things. He had disliked this miracle company since a long time ago, but some people just didn't believe it and kept getting involved. Now look at it, not only was it a mess, they even dragged a large number of people into it. This time, it wasn't just some people from Miracle who were captured. A batch of people from the military had also been transferred from top to bottom. Pride did not know about the other legions, but at least the 4th Legion was like this. Half of the high-ranking generals had been replaced. How's the progress on CI Jincheng's side? Didn't they say that they found a sample a while ago? Pride asked. The progress is a little faster, but personally, I don't think we'll make it in time to find a solution. CI Jincheng is probably under a lot of pressure right now. Pride guessed. Knight felt that his shoulder was hurting again. It really was a pretty heavy topic when he brought up this topic. You'll understand when you see CI Jincheng. Pride was still wondering why Knight would have such an expression when he mentioned CI Jincheng, but when he saw CI Jincheng with his own eyes, his jaw couldn't close for a long time. How long has it been since he last rested? Pride asked Knight. I don't know. Right now he's basically staying inside that laboratory all the time. It's fine now that Cheto is helping him, but when he was alone before this, he was practically like a primitive man recorded in the data. How terrifying. Pride shuddered. Thank goodness he wasn't a student of this. After looking around, Pride asked, didn't they say that little bastard Silin has returned? Where is he? He's not slacking off, is he? Pride had gone to the training room to greet everyone, and then went to the lounge to put down his things. Now that he had seen CI Jincheng, he didn't see the curious Silin either. It had been many years since they last met, and Pride had seen the current investigation information on Silin. This person looked even more infuriating than before. Knight was about to answer when he saw Hui Mao crouching on a metal frame inside the passageway and looking in their direction. Wheeze, has Silin finally come out? Knight said to Hui Mao. Hui Mao looked at Knight and Pride, yawned, then raised his chin and answered lazily, yes. The corner of Knight's eyes twitched. Was this cat competing with Pride to see who could raise their chin higher? In the past, Knight thought that other than an idiot like Pride, there wouldn't be another idiot like him. He didn't think that he would actually meet a fellow who dared to raise his chin and glare at Pride, and the tone of his reply was one of disdain. He didn't know if it was directed at Knight or Pride. In short, Knight felt 2 intense gazes filled with arrogance and contempt colliding in the air. These 2 species were incompatible. That was Knight's feeling. While they were talking, Celine walked over. He seemed to have freshened up and was in better spirits. Right now, he was holding a hardtack and a cold drink in his hand, eating. Pride. Celine said while chewing on a biscuit. There was no need to look at his face. Just by looking at the fellow who was competing with Hui Mao to see who could raise their chin higher, he knew that it was the always proud Pride from his memories. Celine, you stole my biscuit. Hui Mao, who was competing with Pride to see who had the strongest contempt in his eyes, ignored Pride after Celine came over. He smelled a familiar scent. Here's my share. Celine answered calmly before taking out another heated biscuit and tossing it to Hui Mao. Yours? Hui Mao caught the biscuit and flicked his ears. He ignored Pride now that he had something to eat. Pride looked at the person in front of him and was about to say something when Knight cut him off. Silin, you and C.I. Jincheng have stayed in the lab for such a long time already. You should rest a little more. The brain needs rest too. Pride, who was about to make sarcastic remarks out of habit, didn't say anything after hearing Knight's words. Right now everyone was busy thinking of a solution. It wasn't easy for anyone, and every new result was a ray of hope. To be honest, although Pride wasn't interested in that area, he really admired them. Although Silin wasn't as exaggerated as C.I. Jincheng, he also looked tired. Go take a nap after eating. We'll continue after we've gotten some results. You guys chat first, I'm going in. After a brief greeting to Knight and Pride, Silin continued into the lab. He closed his eyes and rested for a moment before continuing his work. That genetic information had been deciphered, which was why he could take a break. Silin's next step was to combine C.I. Jincheng and Cheto's results and conduct an in-depth analysis. Not long after Silin entered the lab, C.I. Jincheng also came out. After freshening up, he couldn't be bothered to chat with Pride anymore. Just now, Silin had sent him a very important piece of genetic information. His workload would be even greater from now on, and C.I. Jincheng knew where his limits were. That was why he and Silin agreed to take a break and replenish their brain power first before continuing their research. As for Cheto, he was still busy with C.I. Jincheng's unfinished work. To him, he wouldn't feel tired even if he worked like this for 10 years straight. As long as he had enough energy, he could continue. Just like C.I. Jincheng said, Cheto was a great contributor. 2 days later, Alan returned to the base. Alan was also Silin's former schoolmate at Seven Lights. Alan already knew some things about Silin. Ever since he left Seven Lights, Alan had been very close to the Andriera family. He had always been paying attention to Kong Man and Pride's movements. However, it was very difficult for Alan to follow up on someone with Pride's background. As for Kong Man, he was poached by the C.I. family after graduation, and he couldn't be found. Later on, he worked with C.I. Jincheng under Lung's matchmaking. Alan personally went into battle and reported some of the C.I. family's 7th Corps. Right now, Alan was the organizer of Stars of Tomorrow. This electronic magazine did not have more than 60 contribution points in the League of Stars. It was far inferior to old giants like Limitless and Luxury, which had more than 80 contribution points. However, there were more young people who would pay attention to Stars of Tomorrow because the characters and deeds inside were all young people. There were people who were in their 20s to 30s. The people inside Stars of Tomorrow were not people that the public of the League of Stars were familiar with, nor were they big shots that they felt were out of reach. The reason the young people loved to pay attention to this was mainly because the characters inside were about their own age. Everyone liked to pay attention to people who were about the same age as them, and some parents loved to watch it as well. They would always use the outstanding characters inside to motivate their children. Ever since Alan's old man passed Stars of Tomorrow to Alan, Alan often traveled around and personally came into contact with these people. There was a period of time when Alan personally went to interview some of the recruits who had made great contributions to the military who appeared in Stars of Tomorrow. In the eyes of the public of the League of Stars, the 7th Army Corps that the C.I. family belonged to was much better than the 5th Army Corps. It was also much better received by the public than the other armies. This was also one of the reasons why C.I. Jincheng agreed to cooperate with Alan. Alan's goal was to increase the contribution points of Stars of Tomorrow in the League of Stars from rank 60. He hoped that this electronic magazine could reach rank 70 or even rank 80 in his hands. Correspondingly, Alan would have to put in a lot of effort. He had personally gone to the front lines many times, personally experienced those things, came into contact with those people, and reported the truest side of them. It was only in those kinds of environments and conditions that such people were the most attractive and admirable. Alan's visit this time was not permitted by his father. It was entirely Alan's own idea. In reality, most of the people who came here were of their own will. Their families hadn't agreed to it, like Pride who had escaped and Knight. The Fiegler family had also requested for Knight to return many times, but Knight kept repeating the same words over and over again. After arguing with his old man for the 9th time, Knight no longer paid attention to the communication on the receiver and dove straight into the training room to begin the next stage of adaptation training. Every time they started a new stage of training, they would come out with a body full of injuries. Other than having to adapt to different gravity environments, different atmospheric composition and so on, they also had to deal with Priest's attacks. It was no wonder that every time they came out, they looked like they were half dead. Amidst everyone's nervousness and the military's activities grew more and more frequent, one day, in CI Jincheng's base, a sharp alarm caused everyone to stop what they were doing. This alarm, fuck! It's starting! The people in the training room and those who were resting hurriedly ran towards CI Jincheng. Since the first day they came to this base, CI Jincheng had told them what the various alarms in this base represented, and the one that was going off right now was a disaster announcement. Other than the base's alarm, Knight had also received a message from the Fiegler family. They were still asking him to return. After Knight read the message, he replied with the same words as before. Then he turned off his receiver and headed towards CI Jincheng's location with everyone else. At the same time the alarm went off, Silin's personal communicator also responded. There were a few messages on the communicator from different people. There were from Ji Feng, Yudi, Engenia, In Wuxia, Shi Huajing, Yu Linglong. All of these people's urgent secret messages to Silin mentioned the same thing: the nightmare taper had officially appeared. Chapter 409. Not long after the 8 armies moved out to capture another batch of Miracle's high-ranking members, they all died. 10 days later, more than 20 sectors in the League of Stars reported the outbreak. If it was just one sector, it could be understood as a normal outbreak. However, this time, more than 20 sectors in the League of Stars were experiencing the outbreak at the same time. Furthermore, after the outbreak spread at an extremely fast rate. Currently, the number of deaths reported by the various sectors was increasing rapidly. Every sector had its own active planets and its relatively inflexible ones. This time, most of the outbreak occurred on the transit planets of that sector. Even if it wasn't a transit planet, it would still be a planet with a lot of human activity. They were like a source of infection. The infected people would leave the planet in a hurry and bring the virus to another planet. Then the vicious cycle would begin once more. One nightmare taper was all that was needed to destroy a planet. Right now, there were at least 20 nightmare tapers scattered throughout the League of Stars. This included sectors A, B, and C. The epidemic had been detected in the areas under the jurisdiction of the 8 great armies. Although it was not a transit planet in that area, and it was not a planet that was particularly important, it was still a place under their jurisdiction. There were soldiers, warriors, and other personnel of their respective armies on the planet. At a time like this, they couldn't give up completely. Morale couldn't be lowered. No one could give up at the start. Just like what the politicians were doing right now, they had to incite the people to fight back and take action. Once the soldiers felt despair at the start, all subsequent actions would deviate from the plans of the 8 marshals. After receiving the news, Silin contacted Yudi and asked him about the current situation of the 11th Squadron. Just as Silin had expected, because of Pango's presence, Ji Feng had ordered the 11th Squadron to follow them and stay away from important areas. Not long ago, Ji Feng and Lan Hudi had worked together to wipe out one of Heaven's Birth squads and assassinate a group of high-ranking members. Based on the information Silin had received from Wuxia, Ji Feng and Lan Hudi were currently preparing to join forces and kill the leader of Heaven's Birth, Bloomer. Most likely, Bloomer wouldn't have imagined that at a time like this, Ji Feng and Lan Hudi would be preparing to kill him. Ji Feng wasn't as honest as he looked. Silin knew that Ji Feng had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Moreover, during the last assassination attempt, Silin suspected that Ji Feng had purposely made it look like he was heavily injured. Perhaps, at that time, Ji Feng had already made preparations. Since Ji Feng was confident in his ability to kill Bloomer, Silin wasn't interested in knowing whether or not Bloomer would be killed. At a time like this, the celestial Heaven's Birth would definitely split apart. Ji Feng and Lan Hudi were using the Nightmare Taper as an excuse to remove the Celestial Heaven's Birth from the four great alliances. While everyone was busy running for their lives, they were busy splitting the four great clans into three great clans. It was a good move to catch them off guard, and it saved them a lot of effort. The spies they planted in Heaven's Birth must have also contributed a lot, and there must have been external forces helping them as well. As long as he knew that the 11th squad was doing well, Sillin didn't care about anything else. After his call with Yudi, Sillin arrived at a meeting room next to C.I. Jincheng's lab. This meeting room was a little special. It wasn't like the other strict and formal meeting rooms. Here, everyone could choose their own seats, and there were all kinds of display boards hanging around the room. There was also exercise equipment. By the time Sillin arrived at the meeting room, everyone was already present. Knight and two other people were at the exercise equipment. Some were punching while others were running with weights. Kong Man was writing something on an electronic board, Pride was playing a game, and Yu Lu was studying an antique rifle. Sorry, I'm late. Sillin pulled out a random chair and sat down. Hui Mao was strolling around the meeting room. There weren't any strict rules for these people to attend a meeting here anyway, and there was even someone eating in the corner. It's fine, I just got here. C.I. Jincheng pinched the space between his brows. The progress of his research still hadn't caught up to this matter, and this made C.I. Jincheng very tired. C.I. Jincheng pressed a button on his controller, and a projection appeared at the center of the meeting room. It was a star map. Every sector in the League of Stars was displayed in it. This is the image compiled from the latest information we've received. The planets marked in red are the planets where the Nightmare Taper first appeared, and the planets marked in orange are the ones that are being reinfected. According to the information we have now, there are already 75 types of deadly viruses, and there are no absolute vaccines for them. It's still fine if they are discovered in time and injected with drugs to alleviate the symptoms. However, these viruses have all been mutated. Many vaccines and drugs created in the past are not very effective, not to mention that there are some new types of viruses, artificial viruses. C.I. Jincheng sorted out the information he received and shared it with everyone. Knight, Pride, and the others passed the new information to C.I. Jincheng. They didn't know much about viruses, so it was fine to just know the general situation. The 8 Corps were no longer fighting each other, and the few political families at Sector A had stopped their civil war as well. They were contacting the local governments to deal with this matter. Before this, they had come up with all kinds of countermeasures, and the League of Stars wasn't without cause. They had been making arrangements, and they were all busy right now. Shihua Jing had been busy ever since he contacted Sillin briefly at the beginning. Sillin knew about his situation and did not disturb him after he received Shihua Jing's message. Right now, everyone had gathered the information they obtained from various channels and obtained the detailed military layout on the projection at the center of the meeting room. The information Sillin brought out especially far exceeded C.I. Jincheng and Knight's expectations. They never thought that Sillin would be able to obtain so much secret and detailed information. When I formed this Taper Extermination Squad, I told you that the place we're going to is definitely a disaster zone, and a disaster zone that's been half abandoned. Then where are we going next? Pride stared at the distribution of the markers on the star map and frowned. The 8 Corps and the big families were quite capable when they worked together. At the very least, the few planets that Pride had set his eyes on had been deployed a long time ago. I'm just curious why so many planets had slipped through the net during the strict cleansing earlier. Knight's expression was serious and murderous. Right now, he was venting this murderous intent directly on the punching cushion in front of him. Everyone knew how destructive the Nightmare Taper was when so many families of the 8 great military legions worked together to annihilate the Nightmare Taper. So why did so many of them slip through the net even though they knew how important they were? Not only that, they were all on very important planets. Even within the jurisdiction of the 8 great military legions, there were Nightmare Tapers in the political families of Sector A. There was one possibility, and that was that the spies had not been completely eliminated. Moreover, the spies among them were all holding important positions. Even those with weak governing power could not have done this. This did not mean that all of these people were spies. It was possible that they still wanted to monopolize the nightmare taper for their own use. For example, the 6th Legion was wavering. It was exactly because of this that some people took advantage of the situation to infiltrate. If they had Si Fong's determination back then, would something like this still happen? Si Fong's military strength back then was far inferior to the current Grand Alliance, but that was the most successful operation that Knight knew of. A bunch of old foxes. The cushion broke with a pop. Knight's punch force had exceeded the cushion's limit. It was obvious that Knight was still very angry about something like this. It was exactly because he disliked those people's behavior that Knight and the others chose to work on their own. They had quarreled with their families many times already, but they would never look back on things that had already been decided. The meeting room fell silent for a moment after Knight was done. Everyone knew that there was something fishy about this, but what could they do? Crouching on the high platform at the side, Hui Mao looked down at the 18 young people sitting in the meeting room. It knew that human minds were very complicated, and it was impossible for it to learn them. At most, it could learn some techniques from Cheto, but it still preferred a primitive and straightforward way of solving problems. Hui Mao was also secretly glad that it was not a human. Most people lived too sullen and tired lives, so it was better to be a cat. Folding its front legs and tucking its tail away, Hui Mao lay there with its eyes closed. It was starting to feel sleepy. Cough. Ci Jincheng pulled everyone's attention back. Regardless, this has already happened, and our abilities are limited. The only thing we can do is to try our best. He pointed at a region on the projection and zoomed in. It was Sector R of the League of Stars' lagging sector. Sillin had been there before. Sector R was also known as the Red Sector because most of the planets there were red in color. The darker the red, the lower the habitability. Many inhabited planets only carried a faint red, not a bright red or a deeper red. But on the other hand, the darker the red, the more minerals there would be on the planet. Logically speaking, with so many red planets and minerals, this sector should be very rich. But that was not the case. Due to the abnormal magnetic field and frequent stellar flare activity of many deep red planets in Sector R, a lot of technological applications could not be applied there. If the technology could not keep up, it would definitely fall behind a lot. This was also the main reason why Sector R was classified as a lagging sector. The important factor of technology caused Sector R to inevitably fall behind many sectors in many aspects. Since technology was useless, some developers turned their attention to cheap labor. The backwater star zones had a lot of cheap labor. Therefore, just like the other backwater star zones, cheap labor was frequently traded in Sector R. Moreover, hunters would often come to this area to do some missions due to the abundance of mineral resources. This area had always been active until now. This activity also caused the epidemic to spread much more seriously than other lagging sectors after the appearance of the nightmare taper. The lagging star zones were definitely the secondary choice of the army and the large families. This time, the deployment was mainly in the trade star zones and the 3 upper star zones. This was also one of the reasons why the number of deaths in the lagging star zones was so much higher than in the trade star zones, and the number of deaths was still rising rapidly. Sector R? Yes, my plan is here. Ci Jincheng pointed at one of the planets. There are a few large pharmaceutical factories and R&D bases on this planet. However, their performance is not good, and a few of them are on the verge of bankruptcy. Of course, this is only on the surface. Also, I suspect that there will be a miracle encampment there. Some people became spirited when they heard Ci Jincheng's words. If miracles, secret encampment in Sector R was real, they might be able to discover a lot of secrets and find some ways to control the current situation if they could take down that encampment. Why do you suspect that place? Knight asked. Actually, it is just one of my suspects. When I sent people to survey that planet, someone stopped me. Although the results were normal, it was so normal that it aroused my suspicions. However, I didn't have the time to carry out any official survey operation later on. As he spoke, Ci Jincheng displayed some information. There were a lot of things wrong in the information displayed on the projection. Those who didn't understand could not see anything, but those who knew a little about medicine could see that something was wrong. What's more, C.I. Jincheng had purposely made a note at the side so that everyone could understand it. The water quality of a medicine of this level isn't recorded at all? Pride said in surprise. Based on the level of equipment shown on the information, how could these pharmaceutical factories produce pollution-free emissions? Also, the medicine production and export quantity don't match. Another person said. Other than that, I've also compared some other investigation data in the past 50 years. There are some things wrong with them, so I suspect that even if there isn't a miracle research lab there, they may have provided miracle with some basic medicine support. Many investigations C.I. Jincheng had done showed that there was something wrong with this planet. But why didn't anyone discover it during the cleanup operation? Even if it's a lagging sector and an unimportant planet, some basic surveys should be able to be carried out, shouldn't they? Someone did something to it. There are many differences between the people I sent in the name of the sector's local government and the people I found in secret. There are a few comparisons you can see here. Some of the medicines had different names on the bottles, but they contained different medicines that looked similar but were completely different from the medicines they had seen before. Most of these medicines are the same type of medicine we discovered in the 6th Legion's underground laboratory. Then what are we waiting for? Let's depart and destroy as many as we can. Those miracle people are crazy. Pride stood up and said while flexing his fingers. Let's depart first. We'll talk about the rest on the way. There's nothing we can do here anyway. Knight said. All right then, let's depart first. C.I. Jincheng had the same thought. He pressed a button on the controller in his hand, and the walls of the meeting room opened to reveal a warehouse filled with equipment. Let's tidy up the equipment first. Lung is waiting for us outside Sector C. When the others walked into the warehouse, Silin paused where he was and made a gesture to Cheto imperceptibly. What are you thinking about, Silin? C.I. Jincheng walked over and asked after turning off the projector in the meeting room. Nothing, let's go. Cheto and Huimao were the only ones who knew what Silin's gesture meant just now. Silin had set up an underground defense network on planet Brown Earth, and he had already activated the program implanted into the satellite array of planet Brown Earth. Right now, the entire planet was enveloped by the satellite array's defense network. Outsiders could not enter, and the people inside would not want to leave either. Planet Brown Earth was not an active planet, nor was it rich. In fact, it could be considered poor. The few planets around it were similar to it. They were poor and their neighbors were poor. This nature had saved them instead. This was because the planet where the nightmare taper appeared was a little far away from them, and it would not reach them for the time being. Moreover, after the planet's satellite defense network was forcefully activated, the planet had been quarantined. The underground network was also being activated at the impoverished old residential area. It would protect that area and the residents there, and eliminate all foreign infected people. At least, this was the only thing they could do before they found a way to deal with the nightmare taper. After receiving Silin's signal, Cheto had activated the implanted program on the other side through remote control. Moreover, it was upgraded to the highest level according to Silin's will. The 18 people in the base quickly gathered their equipment. On the space plane, C.I. Jincheng had already prepared everything they needed and was waiting for them to board. Be careful, Prisa said to them. Prisa was rushing to Sector S, so she could not travel with Silin and the others. All right, you be careful too. The two spaceplanes took off one after another and left Sector C. After Silin and the others met up with Lung at Sector H, they headed to Sector R together. Perhaps it was because of the nightmare taper, but young Master Lung was a lot more serious than usual. He was not laughing. Meanwhile, on a certain planet, inside a castle-like building of the Andrira family, Lung's grandfather, old Mr. Andrira Focos, was clutching a letter to tell his grandfather in his hand. He was so angry that he blew up the entire study. It was because he heard that young Master Lung had gone missing early in the morning and left behind this bullshit letter. Where are Silin and C.I. Jincheng? After sitting quietly for a while, young Master Lung got up and moved around. He asked when he did not see Silin and C.I. Jincheng. They are both busy people. Knight answered with his eyes closed. Is there really no progress? Lung scratched his chin and frowned. It can't be helped. Even those so-called senior researchers couldn't come up with any good ideas. The two of them can only try their best. In reality, Silin had a sudden inspiration when he was sleeping just now. In order to seize this inspiration, he hurriedly crawled into the lab on the spaceplane and never came out again. This time, Cheto did not go to help C.I. Jincheng. Everyone, including Hui Mao, had been assigned tasks by Silin. Are we really going to do this? Hui Mao looked reluctant. It's always good to try. We don't have any good ideas right now anyway. Silin patted Hui Mao's head. All right. Hui Mao sighed. Looking at the tasks Silin had assigned, Hui Mao had a feeling that he would not have time to rest for a long time. However, Silin's idea? How confident are you? Cheto asked. 30%. Right now it's just a preliminary plan. We'll know later. Silin answered. On the screen in front of Silin, an image very similar to the nightmare taper was taking shape. Chapter 410. When they arrived at Sector R, Silin walked out of his lab. His idea wasn't complete yet. Right now he only had a rough outline of it, and there wasn't much he could do after that. All he could do was wait. Wait for it to mature. There was a bottle inside Silin's lab, and inside it was a tiny dot invisible to the naked eye. Right now it was just an embryo, an artificial embryo. Silin was waiting for it to complete its development. Right now, Silin didn't know how long it would take, but it shouldn't be too long. Behind Silin, Hui Mao looked listless. It wasn't because he was tired, it was because he was bored. He was only responsible for processing some data, and it wasn't enough to tire him out. However, for the restless Hui Mao, it was torture to face those boring data all day long. Every time this happened, Hui Mao would always admire Cheto. Just like Silin, the guy always stayed for a very long time without complaining. It's out. Lung bit into an apple and lay on a chair in boredom. He stared at the current situation of every sector on the screen in front of him. Right now, every sector was busy. The League of Stars Army, Sector Army, and some private armies were playing their part, but the number of infected people was still rising. Up until now, the total number of deadly viruses discovered had reached 103. This definitely wasn't the end. The number of viruses was still climbing, and most of them were artificial viruses. The development of vaccines wasn't going too well. Although some of the more remote planets were favored, most of them were controlled by the big families a long time ago. No one could enter them at all, and there were even private armies stationed on the planets. If a normal person tried to barge in by force, they would probably be wiped out in space before they could even get in. Right now, the transit planets of Sector R were almost all abandoned cities. The garrisons outside the planets had destroyed every spaceplane that tried to escape. There was no room for negotiation at all. Those who had slipped out previously had already infected more planets. Therefore, they could not afford to be lenient at all. It was absolutely impossible for them to use their connections to open an exit now. With the increasing danger level, no one dared to be careless, nor did they dare to be lenient. There were many viruses that could affect a person's emotions, causing them to lose control, become irritable, bloodthirsty, and full of aggression. Therefore, many places with serious epidemics were in chaos. The infected people were like madmen, committing atrocities everywhere. There were bloodstains everywhere, and the local army directly killed such people. The situation right now is terrible, Lung said as he looked at the image on the screen. The actions taken by various places were to eliminate the virus directly. However, people were constantly being infected by the virus. There were all kinds of viruses, some were aggressive, some were non-aggressive, and so on. Until now, they only knew that the nightmare taper was responsible for bringing in the virus. However, where exactly was the main source of infection, the nightmare taper? Have they started the first round of division reproduction? Based on the current situation, I'm afraid there won't be much progress for the time being. Moreover, the area of infection will continue to expand. Before this, there were only 20 or so planets showing signs of infection, but now it's close to 200. However, it might be better if the defenses at the back are in place, Knight said solemnly. By in place, he meant to completely isolate the planet and prevent any alien from entering the planets where the infected were yet to be discovered. This also meant that a lot of people would be trapped in space, unable to find their home planet. Get ready, we're almost there. 20 minutes countdown, C.I. Jincheng said. 20 minutes was 20 minutes to be precise. Sector R was relatively close to the transit star. Although it wasn't in a neighboring region, it wasn't too far away. Most people who escaped from the transit star wouldn't try to escape to that planet. The closer they were to the transit star, the easier it was for them to be infected. Therefore, those who had escaped from the transit star with great difficulty would definitely run further away instead of settling down on this planet where the pharmaceutical factory was the main source of their survival. When they arrived at the red planet of choice, their spaceplane did not enter immediately. Instead, they performed a general analysis of the planet's current situation. Right now, this planet did not match the data when seen from outer space. This planet might not be a rank A livability planet, but a rank B livability coupled with the strong physique of the local residents meant that there were quite a lot of people living on this planet. Most of the people working in the pharmaceutical factories were local residents. However, this planet was no longer as clear as before. The entire planet looked misty and surreal. Some places were still flashing with the light of explosions. The explosions were small, but they were very frequent. The battle situation was intense. From the detector, it could be seen that the entire planet was filled with haze. Due to the dispersion of drugs, the habitability of the entire planet had dropped from B grade to close to C grade. Even the local residents would not be able to live in such an environment as before. After a long period of time, they would definitely be seriously affected and might even die. The 3 largest pharmaceutical factories have exploded, C.I. Jincheng said. The explosion of the 3 largest pharmaceutical factories on this planet was the culprit that shrouded this planet in smog. The air is too toxic. We must wear protective clothing later, and we need to change our weapons, Sillin said while looking at the image captured by the probe on the screen. Monsters appeared on the screen one after another. Although they could not see clearly under the influence of the smog, it was still possible to make out that they were definitely not humans. They were 2 to 3 times bigger than normal people, some were even bigger. Also, the long claws on their arms and toes, and the tail behind them all showed that they were not humans. The residents of the planet were fighting against these monsters. These are biochemical beastmen formed from biochemical beast embryos and biochemical human embryos. C.I. Jincheng said, I've seen a similar message before, but that was a few years ago. I didn't think that I'd see it now. Then are they humans or beasts? Pride frowned. They are not humans, and they are not pure beasts either. From the image, it could be seen that many of these biochemical beastmen walked upright. They had arms and legs, some were closer to humans and some were closer to beasts. They were the results of miracles, modifications. The majority of the planet's population was not the infected, but these biochemical beastmen. This also proves one thing: there is indeed a miracles stronghold on this planet. They are planning to wipe out all the people on this planet. After the death of the people on this planet, the biochemical beastmen, and the infection of the virus, in such a busy period, the best and simplest solution for the government of the League of Stars is to directly destroy this entire planet. This is a stronghold that has been abandoned, C.I. Jincheng said. Knight and the others also nodded when they heard C.I. Jincheng's words. Lung looked at Sillin and was about to ask Sillin what his thoughts were when he realized that Sillin was daydreaming. Hey, what are you thinking about? Say it. Lung elbowed Sillin. Sillin came back to his senses and shook his head. He did not say anything. Lung looked strangely at Sillin and did not disturb him anymore. Sillin had been acting very strange lately. Could it be that he was doing research? That was why they said that those who were doing research either had mental problems or mental problems. Sillin ignored Lung's strange expression. He was puzzled. He had sensed a strange signal ever since he approached this planet. He had asked Huimao and Cheto, but neither of them had received any similar signal. This was what troubled Sillin the most. Hui Mao and Cheto hadn't received it, and this spaceplane that was loaded with all kinds of advanced instruments hadn't received it either. Was he the only one who received it? Could it be that the magnetic field and ion activity of this sector had caused the signal abnormality? However, this signal's compatibility was too high. It was as if it was released specifically for Silin and guided Silin to it. Prepare your equipment. We will land in 5 minutes. Countdown begins. C.I. Jincheng said. The operation plan was already displayed on the big screen. Their main target this time was one of the 3 largest pharmaceutical factories. There was a relatively strong signal underneath this factory, and the explosion didn't completely weaken the underground signal. There was no doubt that Miracle's research base was underground. Even if it was an abandoned research base, they could still find a lot of clues. It would be a great harvest if they could find some useful information, and maybe they could even find more hidden strongholds using this base. This pharmaceutical factory was located next to a wide river. The river flowed very fast and tumbled. It was possible to see some human and biochemical beasts floating on the surface just a moment ago, but they were all swept away by the waves in the next moment. It was as if there was a giant beast underneath the river. The river was seriously polluted. There was no doubt about that. The color of the water looked like a drug. Kong Man and Alan stayed on the spaceplane. They would follow the others and provide support and equipment at any time. The other 16 people would go down later, including Hui Mao. The guy was itching for something to do. The sound of firearms being assembled was endless. A minute later, it stopped completely. Everything was ready, and everyone was standing on the landing board at the hatch and adjusting their breathing. They were all people who had been on the battlefield for a long time. There was anticipation, calmness, but no nervousness. Even someone like Pride, who usually had the air of a noble young master, could clearly feel the change in him now. He looked much steadier and more imposing. Although there was still a hint of arrogance, it was undeniable that he was indeed capable. Alan was very nervous. He was the only one among the 18 people who was so nervous that his palms were sweaty. He had also been through many battlefields. His temperament had been honed, and he wouldn't have stage fright. The reason why Alan was nervous now was because he could not help but worry about these people. These were not the relatively simple youths he usually reported on. These people before him were either the former pride of the military academy, or the descendants of the 8 great marshals or the Heavenly Edict Empire. These people clearly could have received the best protection, but they had still risked their lives to come to a place like this. This was truly admirable to him. This was also why Alan had rejected his father's arrangements and come here on his own. What would a true star of tomorrow look like? Alan felt that it should be like these people before him. After organizing their equipment, the people looked at the map and the route displayed on the big screen one last time before stretching their necks and arms a little. When Feng Haichao was stretching his neck, he turned around and saw Cheto standing next to Silin. He let out a surprised ugh. Silin and Cheto were standing at the back, so no one noticed Cheto's strange behavior at first. However, after they heard Feng Haichao's voice that was filled with astonishment and pitch change, everyone turned around to look. What are you doing, Feng Haichao? Fuck me. Cheto, don't you need to wear a protective suit? Hey brother, listen to me and put it on. Other than C.I. Jincheng, Knight, Lung, and a few others who knew the truth, everyone else was staring at Cheto like they had seen a ghost. There was actually someone who hadn't put on a protective suit at such a tense time, and he didn't even bring much equipment with him. If this was the military, he would definitely be punished, and even his mission qualification would be revoked. Cheto looked at them and said calmly, I don't need that. The others looked at Silin, C.I. Jincheng, and the others' reactions and didn't say anything else. The countdown was almost over, and they didn't have the time to pay attention to Cheto. Everyone had their own secrets, and if he didn't want to wear it, then so be it. On the ground, in the city where the pharmaceutical factory was located, the houses that weren't tall were already in a state of devastation. Red, black, and brown blood was everywhere. There were mutilated corpses of dead humans as well as those of biochemical beasts. Shrouded in a faint mist of medicine, there were all kinds of animal-like roars, human shouts, and gunshots. Mixed together with this strange and colorful blood-stained background, it was exceptionally terrifying. The people hiding in the alleys were fighting against the biochemical beasts whose whereabouts were uncertain. This was a battle of survival, and the loser would die. 3 people hiding in a corner of a dilapidated 2-story building were conversing in low voices. They paid careful attention to the situation outside while they were talking. There were 2 human corpses and a biochemical beastman's corpse lying in the courtyard. There were all kinds of blood everywhere. Crack, crack. Not far away, a large man jumped out of a nearby corner and covered the underground passage. Then he smeared some of the biochemical beastman's blood on the surrounding area and removed the human aura in this place. How is it? The people who were discussing earlier asked. They've started retreating. We need to hold those things off for half an hour, the large man said with a smile. If they could hold them off for half an hour, their chances of survival would be close to 0. There were only 4 of them in this place, and there were more than 20 biochemical beastmen coming their way. Perhaps it was because they smelled the scent here, or maybe it was because the biochemical beastman's cry before he died had attracted the biochemical beastmen from other places. The 4 of them needed to greet the monsters here and divert their attention in another direction. Their wives and children were in the underground tunnel. Under the protection of another group of people, they would leave the town through the underground tunnel to find shelter in other directions. Although it would not be very safe outside, at least it would be better than this place. In the past, living close to the pharmaceutical factory was something to brag about. That was because the closer they were to the pharmaceutical factory, the better the treatment they received. They would often receive free medicine. But now, such a geographical location had put them in a difficult situation, and they would be the first to be attacked by the monsters. There were no living people in the area closer to the pharmaceutical factory. Hiss! A middle-aged man who was on guard hissed. The other 3 people's expressions changed. They immediately picked up their guns and leaned against the wall, carefully looking out through some gaps. Bang! There was an explosion outside, indicating that one of the biochemical beastmen had fallen into a trap that they had set in advance and was killed. However, because of this explosion, the other biochemical beastmen were also revealed. Their ruthless eyes looked around, and then they rushed toward the courtyard. Fuck, we've been discovered, a large man complained. The biochemical beastmen's visual organs were very special. They did not just rely on color to determine their targets. The sound of guns firing could be heard. However, the biochemical beastmen were moving too fast, and it was impossible to aim at them. Even if they were to shoot, it was difficult to hit the vital parts. For the biochemical beastmen, it was just an insignificant wound. The biochemical beastmen were getting closer and closer. In the faint fog, their figures became clearer and clearer, and they were getting closer and closer to the small courtyard. There was more than one. There were 10, no, more than 20 of them, and they were now gathering in the small courtyard. Let's go. Lure them elsewhere, the leader said while shooting. The main purpose of their shooting was to attract the attention of the monsters. With their abilities and equipment, it was quite difficult to kill a biochemical beastman. Retreat. The 4 people quickly turned around and ran to the window behind them. They jumped out of the window, but they did not immediately run away. Instead, they fired behind them as they ran. After making sure that the biochemical beastmen did not notice the entrance of the underground passage and were chasing them, the 4 people began to run away. However, they were still no match for the biochemical beastmen. The pursuers behind them were getting closer and closer, and in front of them, there was a 3-meter-tall big guy blocking their way. The biochemical beastman's protruding mouth was like a big starfish when it opened. They did not even have time to raise their guns before the big mouth bit toward them. The 4 people could already smell the blood coming from the big mouth. Whoosh bang! Their heads exploded, and the 4 people who were closest to them were all splattered with blood. The splattered blood dyed the surroundings a brownish-red color, and the 3-meter-tall body collapsed. What's going on? The person at the front swallowed his saliva. Before he could react, there were continuous banging sounds around him. It was the same sound of heads exploding just now. They turned around and saw the biochemical beastmen that were chasing them collapse one by one. Due to the fog, they could not see who was shooting. They only knew that biochemical beastmen were continuously collapsing, and their heads were basically exploding. Killed in one shot. They did not know. In the sky, an aircraft was flying at a low altitude. There were people wearing protective suits standing on the landing board. These people were fully armed, and they could not see what they looked like. However, they could tell that they looked like normal people. After all, besides humans, there were only biochemical beastmen here. Chapter 4:11. The low-flying spaceplane flew past the residential area, and the bullets it fired caused the surrounding biochemical beasts to fall one after another. Some of the biochemical beasts who saw the spaceplane jumped up using their own high-jumping ability, spread their slender arms and scythe-like claws, and swung them at the people standing on the sloping landing boards. However, their heads exploded in the air just after they jumped up, and their brains splattered everywhere, adding another layer of eeriness to the colorful street. The biochemical beasts that jumped into the air were shot down continuously, and some of the winged ones didn't fare any better either. Following the sounds of their heads exploding, they fell to the ground like raindrops. The people who were standing on the ground and hiding in the corners of other buildings were dumbfounded. They didn't know who the newcomers were, but their combat strength was enough to send chills down their spines. No matter how strong a person was, they were still human, and they had weaknesses. These biochemical beasts were no exception. If they couldn't hit their vitals, then no matter how many shots they fired, they might not necessarily be able to kill them. However, if they could hit their vitals, then it would be a completely different story. The residents of this street had once imagined the possibility of killing these biochemical beasts in one shot, but reality forced them to face a cruel situation, and they gradually demonized these biochemical beasts in their hearts. They never expected a planetary government because there was no such thing here. The people who were originally in charge of the pharmaceutical factory were the rulers of this planet, but after the pharmaceutical factory shut down and was abandoned, everyone was abandoned just like that, and turned into food for these monsters. The situation in front of them gave them hope once more. Bang bang bang. Some packages fell from the sky, and one of them landed right in front of the 4 people from before. For the time being, there were no living biochemical beasts around them. Their corpses were everywhere. The spaceplane had already flown past them, and they didn't know where the spaceplane was flying to. The package in front of them couldn't possibly be a bomb, could it? Moving his still trembling legs, the leader sucked in a deep breath and walked towards the package. When he opened the package with trembling hands, he saw that it was filled with firearms and some mini grenades. As if to make it easier for them to see, there was also an instruction manual inside the package that was written in Sector R's language and the League of Stars' common language. Even though Lung and the others didn't think much of these firearms, to these residents, it was already much better than the weapons they were holding in their hands that were almost about to retire. These firearms were relatively easy to operate and were easy to learn. Although there were some limitations, they brought great benefits to the residents. The people on the aircraft did not have the time to care about what the residents below thought. They followed the plan. After flying into the city, the aircraft would lower its altitude and kill some bioorcs. At the same time, they would warm up. Biochemical beasts kept coming out of the pharmaceutical factory. Some were small, some were big. Looks like these bioorcs haven't been out for more than 24 hours, Kongman said. However, it had only been 24 hours for this street and this planet to be reduced to such a state. It was obvious how serious the situation was. Gradually, they arrived at the edge of the pharmaceutical factory. There was a circular open space here. The wide transport channel that was built on it was now full of cracks and uneven. Rocks from explosions and some equipment from the pharmaceutical factory were everywhere. Apart from that, there were also some mutilated corpses of biochemical beasts and humans. Why did they say that they were mutilated? Many little biochemical beastmen kept jumping out from beneath the pharmaceutical factory and feasting on the corpses. Regardless of whether they were human or biochemical beastmen, or even biochemical beastmen that looked exactly like them or were related to them, they were all food for these little fellows that seemed to have just been born. The spaceplane did not land. First, They had to clear out the biochemical beasts around the designated spot so that they could carry out their next operation. They couldn't use a powerful bomb. If there was any important information left underground, the bomb might destroy it. I'm heading over first. The moment he said this, Hui Mao jumped down from the space plane with a whoosh. He was the vanguard, and his current mission was not to deal with the biochemical beasts, but to check out the situation underground. If there was no information, he might as well just throw a nuclear bomb at the area. Originally, Kong Man and the others were worried about whether Hui Mao was up to the task. In the end, after Hui Mao's shadow flashed and rushed down, he saw some biochemical beasts being pierced through. They were the ones that were blocking Hui Mao's way. Hui Mao did not want to go around them, so he rushed in a straight line, which resulted in some of the biochemical beasts being pierced through. Kong Man raised his eyebrows and stopped worrying about the cat. Kong Man would deal with the information that Hui Mao sent over. Kong Man looked at the information that Hui Mao had sent over and said, "There are no living humans over there. They are all biochemical beasts." There were interference facilities around the area. Only by entering the area would they be able to investigate the specific situation. Now, Hui Mao had brought some signal detectors into the area and placed them in different places. It had to be said that Hui Mao's reminder and flexibility had brought great convenience to everyone. The detectors are in place. We can proceed to the next step, Kong Man said. After everyone replied, Kong Man lowered the aircraft, and the people standing on the landing boards jumped down one after another. They were divided into 2 groups, each with 8 people. When the first group jumped down, the second group was responsible for covering them and clearing out the biochemical beasts that ran over. When the first group stabilized and started clearing the surroundings, the second group jumped down. The group moved towards the pharmaceutical factory in a formation. The first round of cleanup had left a layer of biochemical orc corpses in the surrounding area. The number of biochemical orcs in this small area had been greatly reduced, so there wasn't much pressure on them now. There was basically no need for close combat. The bullets stopped the biochemical beasts at a distance of 50 meters. Sillin was still using the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. At first, no one noticed it. When they realized that Sillin had missed his target a few times and several of his targets had fallen at the same time, they realized that something was wrong. Compared to the guns everyone else was holding, Sillin's gun was way too small. However, it wasn't any weaker in terms of destructive power. In fact, it was even stronger. Cheto was the only exception among the group. Not only was he not wearing a protective suit, he wasn't carrying a gun either. Instead, there were some crescent-shaped metal plates floating around him. These metal plates would shoot at any bioweapons that approached him at high speed and cut open the bioweapons' heads immediately. Cheto controlled the metal plates. When there were no more biochemical beasts in the area, some of the metal plates returned to his body and melted into his body. Yu Lu and the others couldn't stop their eyes from twitching. Is he really a human? Or is he some kind of strange species of human? What the meow? There are so many balls down there. Hui Mao's voice rang in everyone's communicators at the same time. Then Hui Mao transmitted what he was seeing to everyone. On the screen, in the beehive-shaped building, there was an unhatched embryo above each small hole. Some were hard-shelled eggs, and some were artificial embryos. However, they were wrapped in a layer of translucent or opaque membrane. The membrane pulsated, just like the heartbeat of the creature inside. A small biochemical beastman broke out of the eggshell and crawled out. There were some protruding spikes on its back, and its body was covered in hard armor. Its eyes were as cold as a lizard's, and there was some mucus on its newly hatched body. However, it didn't look weak at all. In fact, it looked very energetic. After he saw the gray cat, he opened his mouth and let out a hoarse and stifling cry that sent chills down one's spine. Then he pounced towards the gray cat with incredible speed. At the very least, he was faster than the big guys that Sillin and the others had dealt with along the way. However, its opponent was Hui Mao. Hui Mao pressed the charging creature under his feet with a claw and exerted force. Then he stomped through the creature's body, and when he saw that it was still struggling, Hui Mao stomped a few more times. "It's a bit harder than the big guys from before," Hui Mao said. Sillin and the others exchanged a glance with each other. They had a bad feeling about this. They couldn't be bothered to deal with the big biochemical beastmen anymore. They had to get to Hui Mao's side immediately. Kong Man passed some cryoguns and super high-temperature jet tubes to Sillin and the others. These things would be useful in that honeycomb-shaped underground place. Based on the pattern detected by the detector, Sillin and the others dug a big hole that led underground. When they got through, a few small biochemical beastmen jumped out from the hole, brimming with murderous intent. After Sillin chopped the fellow with 2 long fangs that pounced at him in half, the other half of the biochemical beastman could still move. Moreover, it sprayed 2 streams of poison at Sillin. Sillin dodged it, and the place where Sillin was originally standing had 2 holes corroded into the wall. As the poison slid down, 2 traces of corrosion appeared on the wall, and a sizzling sound could be heard. The attack only stopped when Sillin split open the creature's head. Be careful. Don't let these guys get close. Attack the head. These newly hatched fellows seemed to be getting more and more complicated. Knight pulled out the knife that was nailed to the wall and flung away the newly hatched biochemical beastman that had its head pierced through. We need to speed up our progress. This is a huge underground incubation room. If there's an incubation room like this somewhere else, then we'll be in big trouble when these new generation biochemical beastmen hatch. C.I. Jincheng said. The group walked quickly towards Hui Mao's location. There weren't many newly hatched little biochemical beasts right now, and if they waited until the peak of the incubation period arrived, it would be difficult for them to get out even if they wanted to. The explosion of the pharmaceutical factory did not damage this underground place. It looked like a mess and was full of waste, but that was only limited to the surface. This underground place was still very well preserved. However, many of the instruments had been moved away. The people here must have moved them along when they retreated, and those that couldn't be moved were directly destroyed. No one would be able to obtain the data and information inside these instruments. When Sillin arrived at the beehive-like incubation room, Hui Mao was raising his front claws and pinning a biochemical beastman that had just broken out of its membranes to death. These newly born biochemical beastmen looked more like beasts in appearance, but their intelligence was obviously higher than the big guys they had encountered before. This was the most troublesome part. The biochemical beastman that Hui Mao had pinned to death just now knew how to ambush. When the first 2 biochemical beastmen were pouncing towards Hui Mao, he was looking for an opportunity at the side. Although he was still pinned to death in the end, he was a much bigger threat to these biochemical beastmen who already possessed higher intelligence. C.I. Jincheng led the 4 of them to look at other places and search for the remaining information on the instruments. Sillin nodded at Cheto, and the latter no longer paid attention to this huge incubation room. He and C.I. Jincheng went to see if they could repair some of the data and information. Alan, write it down. These are all evidence. Lung said to Alan, who was on the spaceplane outside through the communicator. Alan was able to receive the images they sent over. These would all become incriminating evidence for the miracle that was going to be revealed to the public soon. Don't worry. Alan's hands never stopped moving. He had been busy organizing the information ever since he arrived here. It would seem that the big biochemical beastmen from before were just coolies who went out to take care of trouble and hunt their prey so that they could provide food for the little biochemical beasts that were about to hatch. Motherfucker! Knight cursed at the incubation lair. At the same time, he started shooting at the unhatched eggs with his freeze gun. The white beam shot at the unhatched eggs, and the surface of the eggs swiftly froze. This won't do, it's still too slow. Why don't we just set them on fire? Knight said. This kind of freezing speed was still too slow for such a huge incubation room. The high-temperature spray tubes weren't very effective either. This incubation room was built with special materials that were resistant to cold and heat. Even if the weapons were effective, the efficiency wasn't high. The little biochemical beasts were hatching faster and faster, so they could deal with them easily for now. Sillin patted Knight, who was starting to lose his temper. I'll do it. Sillin informed the others to put on their protective suits through the communicator. Then he took out a gun that Knight and Pride had never seen before. Hui Mao knew this. After seeing Sillin take out the gun, especially after seeing the type of bullets Sillin had loaded, Hui Mao didn't care about the toy over there anymore and hurriedly retreated to Sillin's side. The others followed Silin's orders and retreated outside. They didn't want to come into contact with the huge incubation room. After loading the bullets, Silin raised his hand and fired at the incubation room. There were light popping sounds, but the visual impact made the others speechless, especially Lung. When he saw the effects of Silin's bullets, his pupils shrunk and then he smiled. He didn't think that Silin would find the answers so quickly. Lung and Silin had gone to Sea Paradise together. The sea beast crystals lying in the undersea city were still vivid in his mind. Lung had been wondering about the production method of those crystals, and his subordinates had analyzed the uniqueness of those crystals with him later on. It was because of this that Lung paid extra attention to them. He didn't think that he would see such a scene today. On the other side, C.I. Jincheng and his men were trying to repair information from a destroyed synthesizer when they suddenly realized that the medicine inside the broken medicine bottles around them were drying up rapidly. The few biochemical beasts that were killed just now were starting to shrivel up and turn into dried corpses. In the eyes of C.I. Jincheng and the others, this biochemical beastman was changing at an extremely fast speed. His muscles looked like they were withering, his skin and flesh were shriveled, sunken and stuck close to his bones. Every step he took seemed to accelerate the drying process. His dried and hardened skin tore apart as he ran, and the blood inside had dried up before it could even flow out. In the end, his body was so severely dehydrated that he could no longer move. A crescent-shaped metal piece beside Cheto flew towards him and cut him open. The dried bloodstains and flesh at the incision looked like a piece of jerky. A chill ran down C.I. Jincheng and the others' spines and went straight to their heads. What on earth happened? All right, Silin told them to wear the protective suits just now, so this was what he meant. If they didn't wear the protective suits, they would probably be like that biochemical beasts that had turned into dried corpses right now. What is this? Feng Haichao asked beside C.I. Jincheng. Water bullet. Cheto withdrew the crescent-shaped metal piece and said calmly. Water bullet? They were puzzled. They had never heard of such a thing before. Children's toys had similar names though. You'll know when you get there later. Cheto did not say anything else and continued to search for data that could be repaired. Over at the incubator, Knight and the others stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. Some of the biochemical beasts that had just hatched or had broken their membranes were still clinging to the eggshells with their sharp claws. They glared fiercely at Silin and the others' direction as if they would charge at them at any moment. Some of the biochemical beasts that had just broken their membranes were shaking and shaking off the mucus on their bodies, and so on. It was as if they had been frozen in place and covered by a layer of crystal-like substance. They themselves had become a part of the crystal-like substance, just like the ice of an Arctic zone. However, the temperature here did not change much, which meant that these things were not formed from ordinary ice. The incubator that contained thousands of unhatched eggs was now a place that had been sealed by ice crystals. It retained all the appearances it had before it was sealed, including the cold and fierce gazes of the biochemical beasts that had just broken their shells before they could react. It was as if everything had been frozen at that moment in time. It was so vivid and lifelike. The water bullet Silin used was one of the more destructive ones among the water bullets he currently had, and its crystallization effect was also a lot stronger. That was why the water vapor around it was forcefully absorbed so quickly. After looking at the enormous ice nest in front of him, Knight flicked the wrist blade in his hand towards the few biochemical orcs on the ground who weren't sealed after jumping out of the nest but were either dead or on the verge of death due to severe dehydration. Not a single drop of blood came out. It was as if he was cutting jerky. Knight was just about to express his opinion when he turned around and saw Whis holding a mummified biochemical beastman in its crooked paws. Then, it opened its mouth and bit into it, followed by the sound of crunching and chewing. It was an incredibly bizarre situation. Everyone. Chapter 412. Hui Mao tilted his head and chewed with gusto. The others didn't want to look anymore after a single glance. The scene sent chills down their spines. After glancing at the mummified biochemical orc, Knight shifted his gaze to the incubation nest covered in a layer of ice crystals. He tapped it with his wrist blade to test the waters before extending his hand to touch it. About 10 centimeters below where Knight's finger touched, there was a biochemical orc that had just broken out of its membrane with its mouth wide open as if it was going to pounce at him in the next moment. However, its nervousness was frozen by this layer of ice crystals. Knight was beyond amazed when he sensed the analysis information transmitted through the protective suit. These ice crystals were actually just water, but they didn't feel very cold. Moreover, through the analysis of the analyzer, Knight knew that the eggs in this incubation nest basically had no signs of life. The few eggs that were still alive had very weak signs of life and were extinguished in no time. Knight tested the dagger in his hand. He cut off a corner and looked at the biochemical orc that was contained in the cut. This time, there really wasn't a single sign of life. Crunching sounds rang in the air as we ran back to the frozen nest after finishing the jerky. Then, it opened its mouth and began to chew on the food. Knight knocked on the ice crystal he had cut off with his dagger. The force from his hand told him how hard this thing was, which was why he was even more impressed by Huemao's teeth and biting strength. The others were curious when they saw Knight cut off a piece. They flicked out their blades to take a look, curious as to what this thing was. Due to the effect of the water bomb, the water vapor in the surrounding area was forcefully absorbed. Many of the biochemical orcs that were swarming in this direction stayed far away. Those that could not avoid in time had a lot of water absorbed from their bodies, making them look a little shriveled. However, the biochemical orcs near the exit were not affected at all because there was a wide river next to the pharmaceutical factory and the humidity was high. However, this blank period wouldn't last long. Due to geographical reasons, in addition to the explosion of the pharmaceutical factory and the excavation of Sillin and the others, the underground laboratory had been unsealed. Moisture would seep in again. "Let's look at other places," Sillin said. The others who were having fun cutting acknowledged and threw away the hard pieces they had cut off. However, they kept some small pieces in their hands to study when they were free. None of this was hidden from Sillin, nor did they have any intention of hiding it. After they were done dealing with things here, they walked over to where C.I. Jincheng and the others were. That place used to be some experimental workshops, and they could see many dried corpses along the way. Those were the dried corpses that C.I. Jincheng and the others had killed and then forcefully absorbed water to form. They had seen it before, so Knight and the others were no longer surprised when they saw it again. "What do you think? Did you find anything?" Sillin asked. C.I. Jincheng waved a device in his hand. "The data we can repair is limited, but this trip was not in vain." Although he did not find any news about the dream taper, he had obtained quite a lot of information about the biochemical orcs. The biggest threat at the current stage was indeed the dream taper. However, nobody could tell if there would be more disasters like this after the dream taper. There should be many underground incubation lair in some of Miracle's bases. A metal piece flew out from Cheto's side and nailed an animal that looked like a four-legged snake to death. C.I. Jincheng and the others didn't find it strange. Cheto had already killed a couple of these animals here. Although they weren't biochemical orcs, they could have been animals from this lab in the past. Therefore, they weren't too puzzled by Cheto's actions. However, Sillin sensed that something was wrong. He sensed a strange signal wave before he even entered the planet. After he arrived here, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Moreover, he felt that someone was watching over everything here. Those animals were strange. It was only after Cheto killed them that the feeling of being watched in Sillin's heart decreased a little. "What's wrong?" Lung asked. "I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching us," Sillin answered. "Now that you mention it, it is a little. However, I'm definitely not the one being watched." Lung crossed his arms and scratched as if he was rubbing goosebumps. If someone was watching him from the shadows, Lung would have noticed it himself. Right now, the feeling of being watched wasn't that strong, so it was obvious that the person behind him wasn't paying attention to him. Lung was certain of this. "There's someone else?" The others exclaimed in surprise and looked around vigilantly. C.I. Jincheng didn't see any other humans through the life signature scan on his protective mask. There were only some scattered biochemical orcs and other small animals. However, Silin Helong definitely had his reasons for saying so. There must be someone watching them from the shadows. Was it someone from Miracle? Or was it someone else? Silin looked around and said, "Let's not worry about that for now. After we're done gathering information here, we'll go check if there are similar underground incubators in other places. If there are, we'll take them out immediately." This is indeed a top priority. C.I. Jincheng looked at the information Kong Man sent back. An aircraft had crashed on this planet in the past 2 days, and it was probably from the Central Transit Star. However, there was no virus spread, so it was possible that the people who came here weren't infected. It was also possible that they had been taken care of. In short, there were no signs of virus spreading, but there were definitely battles happening in other places. Let's go out and blow this place up. The other 2 large pharmaceutical factories must have some secrets. C.I. Jincheng put away the instruments in his hands and returned along the road. When they saw that frozen incubator, C.I. Jincheng and the others were also stunned. Combining the scene before them with what they saw earlier, it was impossible for them not to be shocked. Right now, Hui Mao was still clinging to it and gnawing on it. However, since they were in a hurry, they didn't stay for long. Silin twisted Hui Mao off the frozen incubator and waited for night to install the bomb before they quickly retreated. Without the biochemical orcs to continue incubating, the new generation of biochemical orcs wouldn't be able to reproduce so quickly. Right now, the number of biochemical orcs was 1 by 1, and there wouldn't be any new ones for the time being. This did reduce a lot of pressure. After they retreated from the underground lab, Kong Man had already flown the aircraft over after receiving the notice and descended above the pharmaceutical factory. They still split into 2 groups, one group to cover, the other to jump onto the landing boards. Some of the surrounding biochemical orcs saw the scene and gathered over. However, after Silin and the others jumped onto the landing boards, the aircraft started pulling up. Knight raised his finger and started counting down. Explode. Boom. A huge explosion sounded. It started from the underground lab and blew up some of the rocks on the surface of the Earth's crust. When the explosion spread out, the biochemical orcs that ran over couldn't escape at all and were sucked into the explosion and blown to smithereens. The entire pharmaceutical factory was now truly uprooted from the roots. The frozen incubator was also reduced to ashes in this explosion. The people hiding in the residential area saw the scene and felt hope rise in their hearts again. They knew that the biochemical orcs came from there, but they couldn't get close at all. Even if they did, the people who risked their lives to get there couldn't find the biochemical orcs' nests. This explosion had greatly reduced the gloom in their hearts. Let's go to the next pharmaceutical factory. The people who entered the aircraft looked at the other 2 large pharmaceutical factories on the screen and the reports sent back by the detectors. There weren't a large number of biochemical orcs there, only a small number of biochemical beasts. Then there were the battles between local forces. We didn't detect any signal from the incubator. There might be signal interference too. But where should we go next? These 2 pharmaceutical factories are still quite far away from each other, Kong Man said. The 3 largest pharmaceutical factories were located in 3 different places on the planet, forming a tripartite balance. However, it was unknown whether all 3 of these pharmaceutical factories were supported by Miracle, but it was true that these 3 pharmaceutical factories had once ruled the planet. This one, Silin pointed at one of the factories and said, "Let's go to this factory first. I think we'll find something." Kong Man looked at C.I. Jincheng. C.I. Jincheng nodded. "If no one else has any objections, then let's go to this factory first." The others didn't care. They didn't know the difference between the 2 factories anyway. However, the battles in the areas where these 2 factories were located were pretty intense. Even the internal battles were in full swing, and they weren't affected by the biochemical orcs here at all. But if the new biochemical orcs hatched from the underground incubator and spread to the other side, it would be too late for them to fight back. The pharmaceutical factory that Silin had pointed out looked more thoroughly destroyed than the other 2, but Silin could sense a strange signal coming from it. He wanted to go and see what was going on. He had a feeling that he would definitely gain a lot this time. The destruction over there was more complete, but the battle over there was quite intense. It didn't lose to the people in the other two places at all. What are they fighting over? Pride asked. The area where the pharmaceutical factory was located was already so destroyed, but the forces there were still fighting over that territory. They knew the situation over there from some of the intercepted communications. The three forces were fighting over the ruined pharmaceutical factory. The problem was, what was there to fight over in a pile of ruins? There must be some secret down there. From those people's communications, we only know that there's also a base down there. They think that there must be some flying tools down there, that's why they're fighting so desperately. C.I. Jincheng explained to everyone, since the management of the pharmaceutical factory had taken away all the flying tools that could leave the planet when they left, the people here can only attack that underground base if they want to take refuge outside without flying tools. There's really flying tools down there? The others were puzzled. C.I. Jincheng shook his head. I don't know. There's a barrier around the pharmaceutical factory, so we'll only know when we get there. But one thing is for sure, there's definitely a secret down there. We just don't know what it is. Those people couldn't find the secret down there no matter how hard they fought? Silin asked curiously. Before they figured it out, they forbade anyone from stepping foot into the pharmaceutical factory. However, they mentioned that thing in their communications. I don't know what this word means. C.I. Jincheng looked at the information in his hands and said, Silin thinks for a moment, then let's drag a few people over and interrogate them first. After all, we won't get much substance even if we steal communications. We might as well drag a few key personnel over and interrogate them. Makes sense, I agree. Knight preferred direct methods like this. Drag who? Pride asked. If we're going to drag the leader, of course. The spaceplane flew towards the pharmaceutical factory that Silin had mentioned. Meanwhile, the battle there was still going on. The three forces had never stopped fighting each other for a single moment. On a mountain near the city cluster where the pharmaceutical factory was located, inside a building that could be considered luxurious compared to the buildings here. Boss, those people snuck towards the pharmaceutical factory again today. If we hadn't discovered them early, they probably would have succeeded. A young man said angrily inside the office. A middle-aged man sat behind a square table in front of the young man. He listened to his subordinate's report with his hands crossed and rubbed the ring on his thumb. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment as he listened to his subordinate's report. Then he waved his hand and said solemnly, If they sneak in again and ignore the rules, don't do anything and let them go. You guys just follow behind. You're saying, if they're in a hurry, then let them deal with that monster first. They all want to be the fisherman who benefits from the fight, but none of them have the patience. We might as well wait and let them go first. The young man was a quick-witted person. He immediately understood the middle-aged man's words. I understand. I'll instruct them now. Seeing that the middle-aged man did not say anything else, he excused himself and closed the door. After the young man left, the middle-aged man sitting on the chair frowned and thought for a moment. Then he let out a long sigh and got up to walk to the wall next to him. He pressed his palm against a spot and a light flashed on it. Then he pulled the wall up from the bottom. On the other side of the wall was a warehouse. There was a small aircraft in the warehouse. However, the aircraft was too small and could not accommodate many people. Moreover, the equipment was very simple and crude. It would be dangerous to travel long distances with it. According to the information he had received, the threat had already begun to spread on this planet. Outside this planet, there were virus disasters on other planets. No one knew what would happen to this planet in the next moment. Everyone wanted to find an aircraft to leave this place and find a new shelter. However, this was his route. It was the territory that they had worked hard to obtain for generations. It would be a waste to abandon all these resources and manpower. The middle-aged man caressed the aircraft. If the situation was really serious, he could only abandon everything here and leave. As he was thinking, the middle-aged man suddenly saw a shadow flash past the outer shell of the aircraft. Who is it? The middle-aged man quickly took out his gun and looked around vigilantly. However, He did not find anything unusual after looking around. However, when he turned to look at the aircraft again, he found a cat squatting on it. It was a gray, fat cat. The middle-aged man raised his gun and pointed it at Hui Mao. His face was twitching nervously. Perhaps it was because he knew some of the secrets of the pharmaceutical factory here. Compared to humans, those strange animals made him feel more threatened. Hui Mao did not react to the gun in the middle-aged man's hand. Instead, he opened his round eyes and looked at him quietly. Because the lighting in this place was dimmer, Hui Mao's pupils appeared larger. When it was curious, excited, or when it saw prey, its pupils would also dilate. These factors combined made the middle-aged man feel that this pair of eyes was particularly strange. It was not as calm and composed as it was in front of his subordinates. He did not shoot immediately. He was not sure of the origin of this cat. He knew that some animals should not be provoked. If they were provoked, there would be no way out. Therefore, with the middle-aged man's cautious personality, he only raised the gun and pointed it at Hui Mao. He did not pull the trigger. When he pointed at Hui Mao, he gradually retreated. When he retreated to the wall, he used his other hand to pat the wall, but his eyes were fixed on Hui Mao. The middle-aged man could feel the switch on the wall with his eyes closed, so he did not doubt that he had hit the wrong place. However, after a few pats, the wall did not respond at all. Cold sweat dripped from the middle-aged man's forehead. "Where did you come from?" Hui Mao ignored him. Seeing that Hui Mao did not respond, the middle-aged man looked for a few more exit switches. He even tried the switch that controlled the aircraft's takeoff port, which had not been used for many years, but it did not respond at all. All the exit switches had failed, and he was trapped there. Most importantly, this place was soundproof. The people inside could not hear the sounds outside. If there was a shooting inside, the people outside would not hear it either. Hui Mao was watching the middle-aged man in front of it, looking for a place to escape. It was so anxious that it was sweating profusely. It was squatting there calmly, enjoying the fun. "Stop wasting time," a voice said. The voice wasn't loud, but it was very clear in this quiet place. This made the middle-aged man even more nervous than before. He looked around, but there was no one else. There were no alarms, no scanners, and no intruders. "Who is it? Who is it?" The middle-aged man shouted. He had just shouted when he discovered that the cat that was squatting on the aircraft had disappeared. Then, a shadow flashed by. The middle-aged man did not have the time to shoot at all, and he did not see it clearly at all. A muffled sound later, the middle-aged man collapsed. Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at the man on the ground. Then, he turned around and said innocently, "I really didn't do it on purpose. I didn't think that this guy would be so weak. Does he have a concussion? Will he lose his memory? Will he turn into an idiot?" Cheto gradually appeared in the direction Hui Mao was facing. After shooting a glance at the man on the ground, he said calmly, "It's fine. Let's hurry and leave." It was Cheto who had urged Hui Mao to leave just now. This time, they were going to capture the leaders of the three forces and interrogate them. As the leader of the forces in this area, their defenses should be pretty good. At the very least, it was one of the better ones on this planet. However, it was really not enough for Silin and the others, not to mention Hui Mao and Cheto, who were more familiar with these things. Cheto walked over and picked up the unconscious man on the ground like he was picking up a chicken. Then he left. No one inside the building knew that their boss had been knocked unconscious and taken away. Chapter 413. When Romulos woke up, he realized that he was sitting on a chair. His hands and feet were trapped, and there were two people sitting on either side of him. Romulos was all too familiar with these two people. They had been fighting against each other since a long time ago, and as the leaders of the three great forces in the pharmaceutical factory area, they were trapped here as well. The three of them looked at each other speechlessly. However, they couldn't afford to offend someone who could easily capture them and bring them here. The less they spoke, the less mistakes they would make. They might as well save their energy to think about how to deal with what was going to happen next. The three of them knew each other very well, and it was obvious that they couldn't talk to each other just by looking at their expressions. Romulos looked at his surroundings. This place looked like a small room that was about 10 square meters in size. The decorations were simple, but not shabby. It was obvious that these were all high-tech products. Romulos's head still hurt a little. He remembered seeing that strange cat before he fainted. Whoosh! The door opened, and the people who walked in were all wearing protective suits. Their faces couldn't be seen, but their voices sounded very young, and their auras were very strong. Unlike the other two, Romulos's attention was focused on that Huimao. Right now, the fat cat was sitting on a person's shoulder and licking its paws. It looked very harmless. "Yo, you guys woke up pretty fast," Lung said while looking at them. He was holding a syringe as thick as an arm and said regretfully, "I was going to give you a shot if you guys didn't wake up." The faces of the three middle-aged men twitched. Wouldn't that syringe really kill someone? It looked like it was impossible to fake unconsciousness. They had come prepared. "What do you want to know?" one of the leaders of the forces asked. Silin and the others pulled over chairs and sat down. C.I. Jincheng was responsible for dealing with them, and Silin was writing and drawing on the electronic tablet in his hand. Lung and Knight looked at it, but they didn't understand it, so they stopped looking. A few questions. First, did anyone from another planet come over in the past 2 days? C.I. Jincheng asked. Yes, but they were taken care of. The man answered. Dealing with them meant killing them. According to the answers of these three people, Silin and the others learned that although this planet was not far from the transit planet and was not safe enough, there were still people who came here. It was just that as soon as they arrived, they were robbed and killed by the three factions in the area for their spaceships. What the three leaders lacked was aircrafts. Although they were reluctant to give up the territory they had conquered, having enough aircrafts was also a way of retreat and insurance. Since there were aircrafts coming their way, how could they not snatch them? Fortunately, the people who came from the transit planet were not infected, so they did not bring the virus with them. In addition, after learning about what happened on the transit planet, the three leaders became much more cautious. Every time there was an outsider, they would bring along some antivirus equipment. This planet had always been the world of pharmaceutical factories. Even if the three major pharmaceutical factories had collapsed, there were still plenty of drugs and disinfectants. No matter what, there had not been any cases of virus infection here, at least not until now. The three leaders did not know much about the biochemical beastmen. That was in another area. They only knew that something had happened there, and that biochemical beastmen had appeared. After learning of the biochemical beastmen's appearance, they built a defense line here, but they did not go over to help the people there. One reason was that they did not have a flying tool that could reach there quickly. Normal flying cars were too slow, a waste of time, and unreliable. The other reason was that they could barely take care of themselves here, and were too lazy to pay attention to the people in other areas. When C.I. Jincheng mentioned the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory in this area, the three leaders fell silent. However, after C.I. Jincheng took out the intercepted communication information and analyzed the situation for them, the three leaders finally reluctantly said something. There was a base below, and it was where the people from the pharmaceutical factory parked their transportation tools. When the people from the pharmaceutical factory left, they took away some of them, but not all of them. They felt that there must be more spaceships inside. The three leaders had spaceships on hand, but they were too small, and there were not many of them. They all wanted to get their hands on larger spaceships or transportation ships from the underground base. Transportation ships? Is the underground base that big? Pride sneered. I don't know exactly how big it is, but this underground base is definitely not small. Romulos said. Then what is that thing you're talking about? Or should I say, that monster? C.I. Jincheng asked again. The expressions of the three leaders changed when they heard this term. They seemed to have thought of something terrifying. Seeing that the three of them did not want to answer, Knight rubbed his fists and looked like he was about to start torturing them. The leaders of the three forces were calm. Actually, it doesn't matter if we say it or not. There are some things that everyone knows, and we're not the only ones who know. Celine and the others stopped what they were doing and listened to the words of the three leaders of power. They were very interested in that thing as well. They wondered what it was that could make these three leaders wary. We don't know what it is either. Maybe it's a strange product of those people's research, or maybe it's something else. However, according to our elders, there's a devil inside that base. A devil? Huemao's ears straightened and his eyes shone. Silin flicked Huemao's ear and told him to behave. Your elders? How long has that thing existed? Silin noticed this. I'm not sure, probably more than 70 years. We've heard stories about the devil inside that base since we were very young. More than 70 years. That was a really long time. Isn't that someone or something inside the pharmaceutical factory? C.I. Jincheng asked. The three shook their heads. It shouldn't be. I heard that people from the pharmaceutical factory have been there before. It's a huge warehouse and there are transport planes and other flying tools there. However, many of them can't be flown anymore. All the electronic and mechanical equipment inside the warehouse can't be used, and there's no lighting. It's completely dark. Also, many people who went in said that there's a devil inside, a black devil. Some people tried to hunt it down, but the people from the pharmaceutical factory discovered that those people were dead the next day. All their bones were shattered, and it was a horrible sight to see. Didn't the people from the pharmaceutical factory think of cleaning it up? Knight asked. That warehouse's location is a little special, and it's not easy to make a move on it. If you're not careful, you'll destroy the workshop above the warehouse, and it'll be a huge loss. That's why the higher-ups of the pharmaceutical factory directly sealed the warehouse. After that warehouse was sealed, nothing strange happened in the pharmaceutical factory. Not long ago, before the collapse of the pharmaceutical factory, those people tried to open that warehouse, but none of them came out. Huemao's claws were starting to get restless again. He was very interested in those strange things. It was just like hide and seek, except that the identity of the target was unknown. The three leaders no longer hid the truth about that thing. Didn't they want to borrow Silin's hands to open the warehouse, defeat the devil inside, and then obtain those flying tools inside? Silin and the others understood this, but they didn't say anything. The three leaders didn't say anything like, "Tell us and you'll let us go" either. They knew that since the people in front of them had the ability to capture the three of them, even if they let them go, they could capture them again if they wanted to. Therefore, this was not a situation where they could negotiate. Moreover, based on the three leaders' judgment, they believed that these young people's target was not them, and they wouldn't waste too much energy on them. Therefore, since these strangers wanted to know about the pharmaceutical factory, and wouldn't fight with them for the flying tools, why not tell them? After understanding the situation at the pharmaceutical factory, the three of them were knocked unconscious and sent back. Silin looked at the ruins below the aircraft. He knew that the answer in his heart was in that warehouse. Romulos, who had been sent back safely, woke up to find himself sitting on a chair in the office. Romulos, who had woken up, picked up the herbal tea on the table and took a few gulps. He panted, then called a few of his confidants. Stop all operations at the other places and send people to keep an eye on the situation around the pharmaceutical factory. But don't act recklessly without my orders. Report to me if anything happens, Romulos said in a low voice. Although his confidants were a little puzzled by Romulos's sudden change of plans, they didn't ask any more questions when they saw the look on Romulos's face. Other than Romulos, the other two leaders did the same thing. The originally chaotic civil war had stopped. Perhaps it was because of the three leaders' influence, but the people of the three forces felt a strange sense of nervousness and anticipation. The aircraft arrived at the ruins of the pharmaceutical factory in stealth mode. Huimao was still the first to go down and set up the detector. Because of Silin's reminder, Huimao didn't run around. Although it really wanted to go to the warehouse and see what the devil inside looked like. The information about the pharmaceutical factory was quickly sent to the aircraft, and the layout of the underground base was displayed. This should be the warehouse they were talking about. C.I. Jincheng pointed at an empty area on the map because the detector that entered the pharmaceutical factory couldn't detect the situation there. Silin nodded. According to the signal, it was indeed in that direction. But other than these, there doesn't seem to be anything else. As for these, C.I. Jincheng pointed at the dim dots on the distribution map. Their life signals aren't strong, so they shouldn't be anything difficult to get. However, although there aren't many living things inside, the underground base is filled with poisonous gas. We have to be careful, there are a lot of chemicals inside. Everyone, bring some neutralizing spray just in case. Sillin and the others landed on the ruins together. Hui Mao had already dug a hole out of boredom. The hole led to the underground base. Knight and the others who had seen Hui Mao dig before were fine with it. Ci Jincheng and the others looked at the hole, then at Sillin before jumping down one after another. What Ci Jincheng and the others meant was, this cat you're raising sure has many uses. The underground base was filled with all kinds of poisonous gas, and they had to be careful not to touch those bottles and cans when they walked. There was no telling what kind of medicine those bottles and cans contained. They couldn't look at the packaging of these medicines, because the contents inside were different from what was shown on the packaging. The underground base was filled with poisonous gas, so they couldn't see their way at all even if they turned on the lights. However, the visual windows on the protective masks could solve this problem. Through the fog, they could see the underground base clearly even in the dark. Ci Jincheng took a look at the storage devices on some of the instruments. They were more seriously corroded, so how much they could be repaired would depend on luck. A colorful little snake was crawling at the corner of the laboratory table. Creatures that could endure this kind of environment and survive were all very lethal. They couldn't just look at its size. The little snake charged towards Pride, who was the closest to it. Pride's movements weren't slow either. He raised his hand and slashed downwards with his blade, directly cutting the snake in half. However, when the half-snake's body rolled to the side, the blood that flowed out was mixed with certain components in the air, making it even more corrosive. The result of the increased corrosion was that it corroded a reagent bottle there, and the liquid inside flowed out. Run! Sillin realized that something was wrong after he heard the rustling sound of corrosion. The moment he shouted, everyone fled swiftly as well. In the next moment, the place where the half-snake's body was exploded with a bang. Although the scale of the explosion wasn't large, it caused quite a few consecutive explosions. There were more reagent bottles there, and the chain effect caused by one explosion took a long time to die down. Holy shit, this place really isn't fit for humans. I'd rather go deal with those biochemical beasts. Knight patted off the various debris that had fallen on his body. Pride also felt a wave of lingering fear. He didn't think that just half a snake's body could cause so many chain effects. This wasn't Pride's fault. This would have happened to anyone else. In this underground base that was filled with all kinds of gases, any change could cause an accident. This won't do. Sillin took out a neutralization spray and tried spraying a bit of it at the surroundings. The colored or transparent gases were all absorbed by the neutralization spray and turned into powder that fell to the ground. This kind of powder was much more stable than the poisonous gases floating in the air. Let's spray some neutralization spray first. It'll save us some trouble later on, Sillin said. The group sprayed the neutralization spray as they walked, and it did make the journey a lot easier. However, they had learned from the mistakes of the animals that would appear from time to time, so they were extra careful. Compared to the rest of the group, Cheto and Hui Mao were still a bit different in this line of work. They didn't wear protective suits or use breathing aids, and they didn't feel any discomfort even in such an environment. When they arrived at the core laboratories of the underground base, the rest of the group began to help Ci Jincheng repair the information here. Sillin looked around and said, "I'm going to take a look at the warehouse." "I'll go with you." Knight put down the instrument in his hand and said. Lung was about to follow as well, but Sillin waved his hand and said, "It's fine. Cheto and Wheeze will be fine. There are some questions I want to find the answers to." Hearing Sillin's words, Lung and Knight no longer insisted. They pointed at their communicators and said, "Contact me if you need anything. Also, tell us about the devil's true appearance." "All right." Sillin made a reassuring gesture and led Cheto and Hui Mao towards the warehouse. "Just the three of them? Are you sure you'll be fine?" Pride asked. He thought that this place was dangerous enough to begin with, and with that devil added to the mix, could Sillin, Cheto, and Wheeze really handle it? "Don't worry, Sillin knows what he's doing." Ci Jincheng looked up and said, "Also, Don't underestimate him. There's still Cheto and that cat. They're all ruthless characters. Pride recalled Cheto and Huemao's performance during this period of time. Although he didn't show it on the surface, he admired them on the inside. He was also glad that they were on the same side right now, and not on the opposite side. But Sillin really was a mystery. Sillin was heading towards the warehouse. He didn't need to use the distribution map at all. He could track down the signal himself. Are you sure you can't sense the signal? Sillin asked again. Cheto and Huimao shook their heads at the same time. If they still couldn't sense it, then Sillin was sure that the thing was coming for him. The closer they got to the warehouse, the stronger and more urgent the signal became. What is it, Sillin? Huimao jumped onto Sillin's shoulder. He was dissatisfied that he couldn't sense the signal that Sillin could sense. However, Cheto didn't sense it either. This made Huimao feel a lot better. I can't tell what it is exactly. It's like a greeting from someone I haven't seen for a long time. There's nothing too specific to say. Both Huimao and Cheto didn't quite understand Sillin's explanation. While they were puzzled, Sillin arrived in front of the warehouse. The warehouse door was tightly shut, and it looked like it had been closed for a long time. However, the marks on the ground proved that it had been opened recently and confirmed the three forces' words. Since they approached the warehouse, the lighting inside the base had gone out of control. They could feel the gloomy feeling coming from inside even before the door was opened. The warehouse door opened on its own before they could crack the password. The air inside was several degrees colder than outside, and it carried a trace of the smell of blood. Sillin looked around and saw that there were some transport planes and a couple of not-so-big transport ships inside the warehouse. These transport planes and ships looked like they had been here for a long time. The three forces said that they had been here for more than 70 years, and Sillin thought so too. The silence of the machinery was very strong. Walking inside, Sillin saw a couple of corpses lying on the ground. They were probably killed when the warehouse was opened not long ago. Their faces were still filled with fear, but their bodies were sunken in, and their bones were all broken. There were no external injuries on their bodies, and the blood was flowing out of their nostrils and mouths. The warehouse was so quiet that even Huemao's tapping of his ears could be heard clearly. Sillin walked past the corpses and continued forward. A couple of steps later, Sillin looked up at the top of the warehouse. There was a person standing upside down against the top of the warehouse. He was completely silent. A man wearing a cloak. No, it wasn't a cloak, it was wings. The man had wrapped the wings around his body, so it looked like he was wearing a bamboo hat. Chapter 4:14. The warehouse was still dark, but Sillin was able to see the man clearly with the help of the protective mask and his special eyesight. If the man didn't speak, his presence would be very low. He had no killing intent, his breathing was almost inaudible, and his heartbeat was almost undetectable. There was no telling what he was going to do next. The dead people on the ground had obviously seen him before they died, or they wouldn't have looked so terrified otherwise. "Who are you?" Sillin asked. The person stuck to the roof of the warehouse did not answer Sillin. After a brief moment of silence, the feet that were stuck to the roof moved, and his entire body fell downwards. When he fell, he had already turned upside down and landed soundlessly on the ground. The man didn't spread his wings during the whole process. He felt light as a feather, but his speed wasn't slow at all. It was obvious that he was very familiar with the process. The man landed 10 meters away from Sillin, and he still looked like he was wearing a cloak. His height of more than 2 meters and his special cloak made him look very oppressive in this environment. He looked at Sillin, Huimao, and Cheto. He seemed to be very curious about them. His face was expressionless, and his gray eyes were completely emotionless. However, Sillin felt that he was actually excited and curious. He just didn't show it. Another strange silence ensued. Just as Huimao couldn't stand the silence any longer and was about to speak, the man moved. He opened the wings around him and retracted them to his back. His arms hung naturally at his sides, and his body was covered in a coat that looked like fur. He wasn't stepping on anything either. The first impression he gave off was, how black? His entire body was black, and his gray eyes looked even colder and more merciless than before. Of course, that was just how it looked. He didn't say anything, but Sillin could sense that the man's doubt seemed to have grown stronger. Sillin motioned Cheto and Huimao to move to the side and make space for the man. Cheto dragged the reluctant Huimao to the side and stood next to a transport plane. The man moved in the next moment. In a flash, he appeared in front of Sillin in the next moment, and the wings on his back flapped diagonally. Sillin did not dodge. He raised his hand to block the slap. Bang! It was like the sound of two hard metals colliding. As soon as the flap fell, the figure appeared behind Sillin again. It flapped its wings again, then to the left front, left back. With each strike, he changed his position and moved faster and faster. At first, it was still possible to see the figure after each strike, but gradually, only a black shadow could be seen flashing around Sillin. It was the flapping of wings, and the person himself was moving at such a high speed that it was difficult to see and gradually faded away. Bang! Bang! The sounds continued. Sillin did not move his feet. From beginning to end, he stood in his original position. However, the arms that blocked the wing attacks seemed to have disappeared with the increasing speed of the attacks. Ordinary people would not be able to see it with their eyes. Half a minute later, the man stopped attacking and returned to a spot 10 meters away from Sillin. He stood still just like before. There was no panting, no panic. In fact, his aura was exactly the same as before. Mengchi arrow, the man said. This was the first thing the man said after he was done testing Sillin. His voice was a little deep, and it sounded a little dry and hoarse. Maybe it was because he hadn't spoken for a long time. Ah! Squatting impatiently on the space plane, Huimao looked puzzled by the man's words. Mengchi arrow, in the ancient language, it means holy light, Sillin said. He was explaining for Mengchi arrow, and also for Huimao and Cheto. Sillin. Sillin pointed at himself, Huimao and Cheto. Wheeze, Cheto. It's Wheeze. Huimao corrected him from the side. Wheeze is his nickname. Mengchi arrow looked at Huimao and seemed to be thinking about his nickname. For you? Sillin asked again, did you send that signal? Hearing Sillin's question, Mengchi arrow looked at Sillin again and said, yes. Then there was silence. Sillin. It looks like this man really doesn't talk much. Why did he send that signal? Why couldn't anyone else sense or detect it? Sillin asked. Mengchi arrow had no intention of hiding it. Because they don't have that chip. Sillin's eyelids twitched. It's the chip. Is it Howley Hansen's chip? Yes. Were you forced to inject it as well? Yes. Huimao's beard shook again and again. It's so tiring to talk to this man. He's exactly the kind of guy who can't do anything but looks very serious. Fortunately, Mengchi arrow answered him. But it was just a question and an answer. It was tiring just listening at the side. Do you have any information about Howley Hansen? Sillin asked. Mengchi arrow nodded and raised his hand. A projector on a transport plane projected the information. The information was very detailed and complete. From this information, Sillin learned Mengchi arrow's origin. At the beginning, Mengchi arrow wasn't called Mengchi arrow. At the time, he was a biochemical beastman experiment subject and had only one experiment number. Howley Hansen was a member of Miracle. Sillin had thought of this when he saw Mengchi arrow. Seeing this information about Howley Hansen, Sillin suddenly remembered a lot of things from the past, such as the situation when he was injected with the chip and escaped from the underground secret room. Some of the doubts buried in his heart were also answered. Howley Hansen was an employee of the pharmaceutical factory and a member of the underground research base of Miracle. However, as an employee of Miracle, Howley Hansen wasn't satisfied with this. He had an idea in his heart, and that was to carry out his own research. However, with Howley Hansen's position in the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory, he couldn't have his own research project. He could only be an assistant and had to do whatever was ordered. Howley Hansen, who wasn't satisfied with the status quo, had always wanted to appear in Glory and Code, the two electronic publications known as the history books of the League of Stars. Just like the influence of these two electronic publications in the League of Stars, Howley Hansen also wanted to become a person admired by tens of thousands of people and wanted that kind of honor. However, Miracle didn't give him this opportunity. At the time, the person in charge of the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory was very disdainful of Howley Hansen's idea and even mocked him. Not long after, Howley Hansen quietly carried out his research, and the experimental subjects that the research institute needed were the biochemical Beastman experiment subjects. However, the failure rate of the experiment was too high, and he stole many experimental subjects without the consent of the person in charge. In the end, he was discovered. Howley Hansen fled from the pharmaceutical factory where the biochemical Beastman laboratory was located and created a mess. While everyone was busy paying attention to the workshop, Howley Hansen stole a small aircraft from this warehouse. He couldn't steal a large aircraft, and it was difficult to pilot it, so in the end he could only pilot a small aircraft. Because the capacity of the small aircraft was limited, Howley Hansen threw down some things that he didn't think were important, including Manchi Arrow, who had just been injected with the chip and was classified as a failed experimental subject. This was because when Howley Hansen arrived at this warehouse, his heart stopped beating. When Howley Hansen piloted the aircraft and left, before the people of this underground warehouse came to check, Manchi Arrow woke up. At that time, his chip had been stimulated by more than 90%, which was something that Howley Hansen had never expected. After that, Manchi Arrow lived in this dark warehouse. Because this underground warehouse was only a backup warehouse, there were other warehouses above ground for transporters and cargo spaceships, so there were very few people coming here. Plus, with Manchi Arrow's ability to hide, he wasn't discovered. Later, when someone wanted to use the transporter in the underground warehouse, they found that it couldn't be used. At that time, Manchi Arrow was discovered, and those people shot at him, and the result can be imagined, none of those people survived. Later, when a group of people came to check, Manchi Arrow didn't come out and hid in a cargo spaceship. All the transporters and spaceships in this warehouse couldn't fly, because when the chip was stimulated, all the flying tools and operating systems here were destroyed, and the warehouse's monitoring equipment and other lighting equipment suffered the same result. When the people came to check again, they couldn't find the reason. At that time, several senior executives of the pharmaceutical factory were fighting for management rights, and this warehouse's problem was also explained by other reasons, which became the reason why those people fought and attacked each other. Later on, when the pharmaceutical factory's management changed, the flying tools in this warehouse were no longer used. Moreover, there were some important workshops above the warehouse, and the managers were afraid that they would be caught if something went wrong, so they suppressed it again and again. However, since then, the employees had been secretly spreading rumors that there was a devil in the underground warehouse. When the person in charge of Miracle discovered that Howley Hansen had been secretly stealing experimental subjects to carry out his own experiments and learned that a few excellent experimental subjects had been crippled, the person in charge was furious and had sent people to hunt him down. According to the information given by Manchi Arrow, Miracle had blown up Howley Hansen's aircraft, and in Miracle's records, Howley Hansen was a dead man. Sillin didn't know how Howley had deceived the eyes of Miracle's people here, but he thought that Howley Hansen must have packed his things and ran to Planet Brown Earth in Sector X, built an underground laboratory, and carried out his experiments carefully. He wasn't afraid of the people of Planet Brown Earth, but the people of Miracle. However, the people of Planet Brown Earth generally had low genes, and their physiques couldn't compare to those excellent experimental subjects, so their progress was slow. That was why Howley had spent so many years experimenting, and it was only when Sillin appeared that the chip he was upgrading finally came into play. Howley thought that the experimental subject, Manchi Arrow, was already dead, but he didn't expect that after he abandoned Manchi Arrow here, the experimental subject that was determined to be a failure would succeed after that. Moreover, he had been living in this warehouse all this time, and would only go out to hunt when he was hungry without being discovered. Howley Hansen had escaped to that underground base on Planet Brown Earth for more than 70 years. 70 years. If he knew that he had succeeded more than 70 years ago, how would he feel? If Ole Hansen had brought Mengchi Arrow along with him on the space plane at that time, then Sillin definitely wouldn't have existed after that. Maybe Ole Hansen's name really could have appeared in Glory and Code 70 years ago. One had to admit that Ole Hansen was truly a capable person. Although it was different from what Sillin had thought at the beginning, that the chip was made here and brought over, and not made on planet Brown Earth, Sillin still admired Ole Hansen. It wasn't just because he made this chip and changed Sillin's life, there were other reasons as well. Ever since Sillin had escaped death, his heart had always been filled with doubts. But now, it seemed that Ole Hansen still had a trick up his sleeve. Sillin admitted that he had lost to Ole Hansen. He clearly remembered that in that underground secret room, after he killed Ole Hansen, the electronic synthesized voice that sounded from the mechanical instrument said, "Master is dead. Beginning program purge." Why did the purge program need to prompt him? Moreover, every message that was about to be purged would flash on the screen. If he really didn't want to be discovered by others, setting up such a purge mode would be too much of a waste of time. Also, there was a 5-minute program purge, and the next 5 minutes were used to execute the program to destroy, the countdown to desertification. The doors in the underground secret room were all open, and there was no obstruction. The scene that seemed to have been deliberately arranged reappeared in Sillin's mind. The 5 minutes of calculation allowed Sillin to crawl out from the vent. Everything was within Ori Hansen's plan. Although Ori Hansen might not have thought that Sillin would be the one to escape after his success, Sillin couldn't help but admit that Ori Hansen had arranged everything very well. Moreover, he was crazy enough to even calculate the time of his own death. Why did he let the successful experiment come out? Maybe Ole Hansen didn't take in that message at the time, or maybe Sillin didn't see it. After all, time was too tight at the time, and Sillin didn't pay attention to the information of some other instruments. Or maybe the instrument wasn't placed on the test bench Sillin was lying on in the first place. In short, Sillin had missed that message. The projection in front of him displayed a star map, a detailed star map at that. The star map wasn't complete, and there were only a few sectors around Sector R that were lagging behind. However, the information on it was impossible to ignore. It was the distribution map of Miracle's other bases. More than 70 years ago, or perhaps even earlier, Ole Hansen had drawn out the distribution map of those hidden research bases. At the time, Miracle was still that powerful corporation with a powerful backer. Sillin raised his hand and unfolded the star map. He found the planet's location and the pharmaceutical factory that was marked on the map. Below it was Miracle's research base. This and the other pharmaceutical factory could only be said to be in a cooperative relationship with Miracle. They didn't belong to Miracle. Cheto had already copied all the information while Sillin was flipping through the information, so there was no need for Sillin to copy it again. Ole Hansen wanted revenge, and these were some of the distribution maps of Miracle that he knew of. Those people had stopped him from appearing on the 2 top magazines and obtaining glory, so Ole Hansen bore a grudge against them. His successful experiment was the sharpest weapon for revenge, and it was also the proof that he, Ole Hansen, was in no way inferior to some of the people in charge of Miracle. Sillin was one of them, and Menji Arrow. Looking at the person in front of him, Sillin didn't know what kind of attitude he should use to face him. Manquiero didn't have any malicious intentions toward Sillin. Perhaps they were like brothers, and the chip that had fused with their genes was like their blood relation. In the eyes of the researchers, this was just a relationship between 2 experimental subjects. However, this chip was too special. Just like a blood connection, Sillin could sense Menji Arrow's existence even before he actually entered the planet. This was the connection between the chip. In the entire League of Stars, and even in this vast universe, Sillin and Menji Arrow were the only ones who shared such a special blood connection. Menji Arrow had been staring at Sillin all this time as if he was waiting for Sillin to make a decision. Menji Arrow, holy light, in the ancient language, was the race of the happy people who lived under the light in the myth of creation. Menji Arrow looked very serious and cold, but this name revealed his thoughts. Perhaps, when he was an experimental subject in an underground experimental base, He was just a person with nothing but a serial number. Menji Aro didn't understand this world. What was life, what was ideal, and what was a dream? However, later he stayed alone in this warehouse and released some of the information and images of the outside world that he had stolen while hunting through the projectors on the transport planes in the warehouse. He stood upside down on the roof of the warehouse and looked at the residents outside. He looked at the life under the sun and gradually understood the world outside the warehouse and the people outside. He knew that he was different from the others. Whether it was the people outside or the biochemical orcs in another pharmaceutical factory on a planet far away from here, he knew that no one on the entire planet could receive the signal he had released from the chip. It was like you were in a crowd and you were greeting people in a friendly way, but no one could understand you and no one responded. Disappointment had become a habit. He always went out at night because he knew that his existence was unusual. That was why he deliberately avoided daytime. Menk Aluo remembered that he once saved a girl when he went out. When he rescued the girl from the hands of those evil forces, he was stabbed by the girl. She was a beautiful girl, but Mankiero remembered the fear, alienation, and strong rejection in the girl's eyes when she looked at him. It was as if she was looking at an alien, a devil that people talked about. What did it feel like to be stabbed by a knife? Menji Aro couldn't remember clearly, but it seemed to hurt a lot. He didn't know where it hurt. He couldn't integrate into this society, so he could only stay alone in this dark warehouse and look at the bright world outside through the projector day after day. Until one day, he released the signal that came from the chip as usual. It was like a habit that supported his life and proved his existence. It was something he had to do every day. The signal was received. Menji Aro was waiting for him. He knew that the enemy would come. Silin looked at Menji Aro before turning around and walking toward the warehouse entrance. Hui Mao shot Menji Aro a glance before following him to the door with Cheto. Menji Aro didn't move, speak, or change an expression as he watched the trio walk out of the warehouse. However, when Silin stopped at the warehouse entrance and yelled at Menji Aro, "Follow me," Hui Mao saw light return to Menji Aro's gray eyes. Chapter 415. Maybe it was because he had been isolated for too long, and the things he had experienced over the years, Mankiero didn't like to speak, and he had trouble communicating with other people. Just like before, he answered every question and didn't want to say anything more than that. In fact, he wasn't even willing to express what he wanted or what he wanted. It wasn't convenient for Silin to ask about the chip right now. He would talk to Mankiero after everything was over. This was their secret, and it couldn't be leaked. Otherwise, it would cause another conflict. Silin left the warehouse and walked towards C.I. Jincheng and the others. The passage along the way was still surrounded by all kinds of poisonous gas, but Mankiero wasn't wearing a protective suit. Just like Cheto, he was walking calmly inside. Hui Mao looked at Mankiero, and then at Silin. He knew that Silin and Mankiero were very similar. If Mankiero could resist the poisonous gas, then Silin should be able to as well. So why was Silin wearing such a thick protective suit? I don't understand. Flicking his ears, Hui Mao stopped thinking about it and crouched on Silin's shoulder. He looked at Mankiero who was following behind him. He began to think about something. If Mankiero was trustworthy, then there were 4 of them including himself, Silin and Cheto. No matter what, they wouldn't lose to Sigma and his brothers. In Hui Mao's opinion, the 4 of them were similar. 2 of them had chips, 1 was a cyborg, and the last was a robot. All of them could communicate using the machine language. Wait, does this black idiot who just joined us know the machine language or not? Hui Mao looked at Mankiero and asked him a few questions using the machine language. But Mankiero simply looked at Hui Mao and didn't answer. Do you understand the machine language? Left with no choice, Hui Mao asked in the League of Stars language. I don't understand. Meng A Luo was still expressionless. That won't do. Hui Mao was wondering when he should teach Silin the mechanical language. It wasn't every day that Hui Mao found someone with a mechanical structure similar to Silin's, and he didn't want to give up. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Along the way, Hui Mao chatted with Menji Aro. Silin allowed them to do as they pleased. This was beneficial to Mingji Arrow. If he were to join the 11th squad in the future, he would need to interact with others. Nonsense was the first line of communication, and Huemao's nonsense was especially useful at times like this. C.I. Jincheng's side was almost done. All he needed to do was to wait for Silin to arrive before retreating. When they saw the person following behind Silin, C.I. Jincheng and the others were a little shocked. This was because this person was nowhere to be found on the life signature display of the detector. There were no dots of light at all. It looked like a biochemical orc, but the detector did not have any indication of a biochemical orc. Moreover, this person wasn't wearing any protective clothing. It looked like he wasn't affected by the poisonous gas. However, since Silin had brought him here, he wasn't an enemy. C.I. Jincheng and the others didn't raise their guns or make any threatening gestures. This made Mingji Arrow relax a little. Silin, the person behind you is... Lung gestured for Silin to introduce him. The person inside the warehouse used to be a biochemical orc experiment. He escaped and lived in the warehouse. Silin gave a brief introduction of Mingji Arrow's situation. There were a lot of things he left out, and the chip and Howley Hansen were secrets that couldn't be told to anyone. C.I. Jincheng and the others didn't pursue the matter. They only needed to make sure that Mingji Arrow wouldn't be a threat to them and wouldn't bring them any trouble. Under such circumstances, they were happy to receive a helping hand. Silin asked Cheto to take out the map of miracles surrounding star zones. There would definitely be a base related to the nightmare taper on it. The cleanup activities at the trade zone and the upper 3 star zones were progressing rapidly, and a lot of bases had been eliminated. Relatively speaking, it was much more likely that Miracle's people had moved to the lagging star zones. Even the military couldn't carry out a cleanup operation in one go in the lagging star zones. The environment in the star zones was generally not good, and it provided some people with a natural protective barrier. It's too much time consuming to look for them one by one. C.I. Jincheng frowned. Based on the current situation, the infected area in the League of Stars was even bigger. Although there was progress in developing a vaccine, there was still no cure for the root cause. They could only try their best to prevent the infected's condition from worsening. Are the project teams making no progress? Silin asked. Those project teams were all authoritative people in the relevant fields. If they had no progress until now, then the situation wasn't ideal. C.I. Jincheng shook his head. Silin thinks for a moment and looked at Mingji Arrow. Do you know anything about the nightmare taper? I don't. Then do you know where the people from the pharmaceutical factory went? Silin asked from another angle. I know part of it. Tell us, we need some reference. Mingji Arrow pointed at the projected map and explained some of the information he knew in simple words. Although he didn't say much, it was all on point and gave Silin and the others a lot of reference. So, the upper echelons should be going to these 2 places. Silin summarized the information Mingji Arrow told him and circled 2 planets. Those were the 2 planets that the managers of the biochemical orc base went to the most. As for the others, they were scattered all over the place. Most of them were within these marked areas. It seemed like Mingji Arrow had spent some effort to understand the marked map that Ho Lei left behind. It was just that Mingji Arrow was a loner and was unwilling to go out. No matter what, let's go check out these 2 places first. It'll be more information if we can find the Nightmare Taper's base. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper itself, it'll be good if we know something about the virus it carries. At least, we can make a vaccine as soon as possible to reduce the deaths. C.I. Jincheng put the map away and looked at the others. Let's do it in a roundabout way. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper, it'll be worth it to find more information about the viruses. Knight patted the dust off his protective suit and said. The rest and Knight had the same thought. Mingji Arrow still had no expression on his face, but Silin could sense that this guy was confused and a little nervous. After all, it was his first time coming into contact with so many people at such a close distance, unlike those who would shoot or scream when they saw him in the past. Mingji Arrow was extraordinarily sensitive to kindness and malice after living for so many years. However, he did not see any disgust or alienation from these people. He was just curious at most. His tensed body relaxed a little as well. When they were leaving the underground base, Long looked at Minji and asked, "Hey, brother, are you a biochemical orc?" Minji paused and nodded. The term biochemical orc was filled with the aura of a different race. However, Long did not look down on them when he said the term biochemical orc. "We killed many biochemical orcs just now. They ran out of the base," Long said. Minji was silent, while the others seemed to be walking seriously, but they were actually listening with their ears perked up. Minji spoke, "I killed many too." Long stared at Minji and nodded. "You're different from those biochemical orcs." "Of course, he's my follower," Hui Mao said immediately. Kong Man was already waiting for them with the space plane when they got out of the underground base. Minji hopped onto the boarding board after Silin signaled him to do so. After entering the space plane, everyone sat down and rested. C.I. Jincheng told Kong Man about their next target planet and that they were in a hurry. "What do we do with the things inside the warehouse?" Knight gulped down some saliva and asked, "Those people will probably go fight for them immediately, right?" The space plane inside the warehouse only had some system issues, but it would take a lot of time to repair. This was also why the people in the pharmaceutical factory were unwilling to repair it in the past. They were unwilling to fork out either time or money. "Let's leave it to the three forces to decide. I believe they'll be willing to pay the price," Silin said. When the situation on this planet happened, the three pharmaceutical factories had closed down one after another. All flying tools that could leave the planet were under the control of the people in the pharmaceutical factories, and all the space planes that were not taken away had been disposed of except for that special warehouse. "Those people have been loitering around the area lately, but they didn't notice us." Alan told Silin and the others about the people who had been monitoring the area around the pharmaceutical factories recently. If the three forces were going to fight for it, there would definitely be a large-scale battle later on. It was also possible that they would divide it up in the dark. No matter what the three forces decided, it was no longer important to Silin and the others. Lung and the others were loitering around Minji restlessly, trying to get close to him. Then, when they realized that Minji wasn't as fierce as he looked, they even studied Minji wings out of curiosity. Hui Mao crouched on Silin's shoulder and looked in that direction, but the twitching of his tail from time to time told Silin that the guy was thinking of some kind of trick again. Finally, Hui Mao stood up and ran over with cat-like steps. "Go away, go away." Hui Mao chased away the people who were studying Minji wings. He paused in front of Minji and said as if he had made up his mind about something, "Can you cross your arms? Like this." Hui Mao made a demonstration of crossing his arms. Minji didn't say anything, but he did as he was told. "Raise your elbows a little more. Don't move your upper arms. Yes, just like this." After seeing that there was no problem, Hui Mao jumped on Minji shoulder. When Minji turned his head to look at him, Hui Mao raised his forefoot and pushed Minji head back so that it wouldn't stare at him. Then he jumped on Minji crossed arms and squatted down to try it. He felt uncomfortable, so he instructed Minji to adjust his arms. It looked like Hui Mao was being held in his arms. When he finally felt that it was okay, Hui Mao squatted on Minji crossed arms and said, "You can put the wings back." Minji did as he was told and formed a cloak again. "Okay, don't bother me. I'm going to sleep." Silin and the others. Silin seemed to see a moving cat's nest, a human-shaped cat's nest that worked hard without complaint. During this process, Silin noticed that Minji seemed to be a little stiff, but it didn't reject it. "Never mind, I'll let that cat be cocky for a while, let it get closer to Minji and cultivate their friendship as teammates." "Come here, Silin." C.I. Jincheng waved at Silin while studying the information in his hand. Silin told Cheto to give the cat a beating if it got carried away. Otherwise, it would climb all over him. Cheto nodded. He would communicate with this new teammate of his. In terms of communication, Minji couldn't compare to a pure robot like Cheto. "What's wrong?" Silin walked over and sat down opposite C.I. Jincheng. C.I. Jincheng didn't say anything and passed Silin a new set of information. Silin took it and looked at it. He raised an eyebrow and said, "It's starting to divide and reproduce?" From this new information, Sillin knew that the nightmare taper had begun to divide and reproduce. The nightmare taper multiplied by 2 divisions, just like a single cell. Also, they carried the same type of virus. "It's not easy to find the nightmare taper this quickly," Sillin said. According to this information, the nightmare taper they captured now should be the first batch of division. A few authoritative research teams had begun to research this nightmare taper. They were divided into a few directions, such as suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation and researching a virus vaccine. There didn't seem to be any progress in suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation. Right now, there was no way to completely suppress this creature's division. Even if there was, the method wasn't practical. As for vaccines, up until now, only 2 types of virus vaccines had been developed. Moreover, they were still in the experimental phase, so it was uncertain how effective they would be. Suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation doesn't seem possible at this stage, C.I. Jincheng rubbed his forehead, but we can put more effort into the virus vaccine. The only thing we lack now is time. The virus is spreading too fast and more planets are infected. Trade sector is especially bad. Sillin handed the documents back to C.I. Jincheng and said, "We should be able to find information about those viruses when we look for Miracle's base this time." C.I. Jincheng smiled tiredly. "I hope so." Sillin stopped talking. He really felt that he would find some important information soon. Moreover, there were hundreds of viruses in the nightmare taper's body. Most of them were difficult to deal with, including those man-made viruses. They couldn't be developed by a single research base, nor could they be developed overnight. Meanwhile, they did not find much information about the virus when they attacked Miracle's bases in the trade sector and the upper 3 sectors. In other words, the virus might have been developed in the research base in the other sectors. The results were then combined and implanted into the nightmare taper's body. There were a lot of lagging star zones and they covered a lot of areas. The base distribution map Sillin obtained from Menji Arrow was only a part of it, but it would be enough to excite him if he could find some information about the virus. At this time, when the virus was wreaking havoc and people were panicking, feeling that they could not find a way out, the birth of every virus vaccine was a ray of hope. Their next target planet was also in Sector R. However, the planet's living environment was not good. There was an asteroid belt around it, and it was easy to cause an accident if someone with poor piloting skills came over. The planet was not big. According to the probe's report, it was a rank D habitable planet. There were no other large planets around it, and it was hidden in the asteroid belt. It was very difficult to be discovered. The ion storm just passed. Our luck is pretty good. Kongman smiled. I really couldn't tell that Miracle's research base was here. Pride clicked his tongue. I wouldn't have noticed that there was a planet here if I didn't look closely. Lung looked at the star map in his hand and the image displayed on the screen in front of him. There was no planet like this on Sector R's official star map. There was only this asteroid belt. If it was an adventurer or a hunter regiment, they would definitely take a detour after learning that there was an asteroid belt here. However, the star map in Lung's hand was not the official star map of Sector R. It was a detailed star map drawn by the Andryra family themselves. He didn't expect that they would also overlook the planet hidden in this asteroid belt. How capable, Knight concluded. There is no moisture or atmosphere detected on the planet's surface. Judging from these general survival indicators, it is undoubtedly a rank D habitable planet. Kong Man explained the planet's detection information to everyone. If the markings are correct, then Miracle's research base on this planet is at underground. Everyone's spirits rose. The more hidden it was, the more it proved the importance of this research base. The more important it was, the more likely they would be able to find a solution to the nightmare taper. Menji Arrow looked at the crowd. He didn't quite understand why they were suddenly happy, but Cheto had explained it to him. As for how much he would understand, well, he would take his time. Hui Mao was still sleeping soundly inside the cloak. He didn't show any intention of coming out even when he heard that there was a discovery outside. Kong Man drove the spaceplane into the asteroid belt and found a nearby place to hide the spaceplane. They didn't dare to drive the spaceplane directly because they would be discovered. The asteroid belt provided them with a hiding spot. The special magnetic field here and the spaceplane's own concealment method made it very difficult to be discovered. Send 2 people to scout the path first and confirm if Miracle's base is there, C.I. Jincheng said. I'll go with Cheto, Silin said. Everyone looked at Menji Arrow's direction. The cat was not planning to come out. Count me in. It's safer with 3 people. Knight adjusted his protective suit. I'll go too. Let's split up and get ready, Lung also said. No, Silin and the others will go first and observe the situation. If there really is a base here, then it must be a heavily guarded one. It's not good to have too many people. C.I. Jincheng stopped Lung from following them. He didn't allow anyone to go with them either. Menji Arrow walked over and didn't say anything. But it looked like he wanted to go too. No need, the 3 of us are enough. Help me keep an eye on that cat and don't let it cause trouble. Silin said, also, there's no protective suit that suits you here. You'll have to wait for a while if you want to go into space. Menji Arrow nodded in response to Silin's words. Let's go. Silin patted Cheto and Knight. After checking their protective suits, they left through the hatch. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.